All right. We're back. We're back on YouTube. Hey everyone. This gives us a nice soft mulligan for the not getting the links right and then me accidentally deleting our present or the then present live stream. It doesn't matter. Welcome back.
Do you have it up right now? I'm asking you.
I do.
I don't.
That's
I can't.
What she said.
I can't find it.
It is. Refresh it. It is. I can see it on my YouTube.
Okay, we're good.
Yeah.
I had faith in you the whole time. Don't worry about that.
Good. That's good. Second beer. Only my second beer in like 6 hours. So
you know how this stuff gets.
That bodes well. Here we are. While you are sharing that, I'm just gonna start talking. Kevin is fixing my error here. We had some issues, technical difficulties, a lot of ins, a lot of outs, a lot of what have yous, as the dude would say. But we are here doing our final conversation over F.A. Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. I think we began this journey, gosh, Kevin, was it a year ago, do you think?
At least, yeah, it has to be a year ago. I mean, we were moving at a good pace. Remember when we had that one goal of once a week? Man, we kept up with it, and we were idiots. So what normal people would do, these planners, quote unquote, would like
get ahead of it.
Get several weeks, a month, 4-5 episodes ahead. And we didn't do that. So we're going at a pace. And I mean, when we did the first episode, we did not prepare like we did the last several, which I tallied up, and I told you before we started the live stream that we are now, before this series of live streams we just started, we were at 26 hours and 8 minutes of total audio about this book. And to give you a point of reference here, it is 11 hours and 45 minutes for the audio book of this book. So for those of you, like I know James Darian, you said in the comments before that, oh man, I've had this book sitting on my bookshelf for 2 years and haven't even read it yet. If you've watched all these so far, for the one or two of you that have done that, you don't need to read the book. I'm pretty sure we have it well covered for you. We go in depth at every chapter, kind of give our own analysis, and applying the lessons we learned in this book to what's happening today, or at the time that we were doing the recording. So I think it's a nice introductory to the book and kind of the ideas that F.A. Hayek goes into, especially, for those of you who want to know more about just general economics and how it applies to reality. Economics is very often, a boring study, so it doesn't attract a lot of people. I'm one of the weird ones that loves diving into economic books, but if you haven't gotten into it or don't understand the importance of economics and how it applies to everything else, one, you really should do that, as a chapter in the book kind of goes over. When people say, oh, I'm just going to plan the economic parts of your life. All of this planning that we're doing is going to stay in the economic sphere. That never happens, because the economic sphere is not its own reality out there apart from everything else. You can't have someone come in and say, I'm going to take care of your basic needs, housing, clothing, food, and expect that to just stay in those arenas. They are going to branch out to everything else, because just in those basic necessities, you now no longer have a choice in those type of necessities, right? If someone supplies you food, you get the food you get. You don't get to go on a vegan diet in the Soviet Union because you just get the food that they give you, right? It's this lack of choice, which goes a lot into the book again, that comes with just giving you the basic necessities, the planning the basic necessities, and it never just stays in that area. So learning more about economics, learning more how it applies to real life, is only going to help you, understanding the things that are going on today, which is obviously extremely important.
Yeah. Somehow I'm getting, there it is. So somehow literally just now a video popped up, or a window popped up with the YouTube link. And so I heard you say everything you said totally fine. And then it like populated with the sound. And so then it, like, as I started talking, I heard you say, you get what you get. Anyway. Yeah. And what's kind of interesting is in the appendix, you hear like some commentary on the book and some forewords to like different versions of it. And there, I think there was at least two places where their comment is made that the chapters on economics, or like the economic aspect of the book, is actually the weakest part. So like chapters like The End of Truth or Why the Worst Get on Top, those aren't about the economics of it. They're about, kind of the implications of this kind of theory of economics. But I think to your point, like you have to understand, what works and what doesn't work in order to know like the positive or negative consequences, like in order to like make the argument, I guess. So I'm agreeing with you, but like I think what makes this so brilliant is that it's not just about the economics of it. It's about, and by the way, take a shot every time we say economics, but it's about like the implications of things that seem, kind of like minor. Like he even mentions that in one of the chapters about, people think it's just going to be this one thing. If they just control this one thing, then, we can leave it in this sphere. And really it's like, no, it's actually all of these things. So like, here would be a contemporary example. It's like, well, yeah, but what if they only make decisions based on public health? Like how much could that possibly impact, right? Like that's not going to impact jobs. It's not going to impact trade or travel or anything like that. Well, that's not true, right? Like, you can't just have people with a ton of power and a tunnel vision on just one thing, because nothing is that simple. And the things that they want to regulate and they want to meddle with extend everywhere. Anyway, so like Kevin, this, we don't have an outline for this, like you mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned it in this thing or in one of the ones that I accidentally deleted. I don't know, but we don't have an outline. We were just going to talk kind of about our main takeaways and, what stands out to us, since it's been several months since we started an outline for this conversation, like 3 months ago, something like that. I think we got through like 5 pages or so. Yeah. And then we aren't even doing anything with that. And so it's been a while since we went over this material. And there's some, pluses and minuses to that. But, what we talked about doing is just kind of having a conversation about what the book is meant for us, and what we've taken away from it, what we think kind of the practical, I don't know if application or lessons for today are. So like, why don't you just start and say like, what, as you think about reading this book and doing, to have almost 30 hours, of after this is done, we'll probably be there. And that again, doesn't even include the prep work and how much time we spent making the outline, which is like what, 114 pages, 111 pages.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's like all of the notes. Like for you, like what has been, I don't know, like either the stuff that has stuck out to you, like, do you think, have you changed your mind on anything like from reading it? Just a general kind of broad strokes.
Yeah.
For you, like where are you at with this book?
Yeah. It's hard to think now, like the stuff that changed your mind all the way back then. Because now it just feels like, oh, these are my ideas now, because truly you become the person you read, right? Or you read most. I think I've become a lot more, at least in my worldview, like Thomas Sowell, because I've read so many of his books. So if you told me, hey, what was your thinking on economics or race relations or all these different things, 8 years ago, I'd be like, I don't know, because I've read through all this material and it's kind of become me now. So when it goes through, I've read through now this book for like the 8th time, and now reading through it again, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what I think. It's exactly what I think. And now it's like, it's hard to tell the difference between what you actually thought and what Hayek kind of put into your head a little bit. But I think, some of the biggest takeaways is language. I think he does a good job of right from the start. I mean, we spent a lot of time just on the intros, which there were several intros forwards to this book, because it was done a few times. One time originally for the British people, then released in the US. And the way it was received in both of those is drastically different, because, in America, especially at that time, and a little less now, I suppose, is like they didn't see this in real person. They didn't have these people talking about planning. They did, but not at the level that you could see in the UK. So, these people were kind of they really gravitated. The American people really gravitated toward this book because I think the people it was originally published for, the people in the UK, was kind of like too close to the forest to see the trees. It was kind of like, yeah, I know this thing, and I don't think it's that big of a deal, or planning isn't that big, because it's a big part of their life, where in America it was not a big part of our lives. And even now it's like, oh, they talk about planning. It's like, well, we don't have people asking for planning today. You don't see AOC talking about planning. You see, you're talking about democratic socialism as if it's something different. And just to read through this book and understand that the same euphemisms, the same changing of language was used back then as it is now, kind of helps you understand not only the evolution of kind of conservative libertarian, or what he calls liberal, what the European liberal thought. You can also see the evolution of people still trying to put this planning into the system and control our lives in economics, which branches to the way you can live, which branches to the choices you can make, which branches to all these different things that you just don't see unless you see it put into these terms from someone, at the end of World War II, can put it in these terms and explain to you, all right, these are what they're going to change. This is how they're going to sell you on this the next go around. And, it just kind of opens your eyes to, some of the buzzwords and what people try to, again, sell you as to, like, oh, we're going to make your life better because we're going to give you all these things, provide those basic necessities. And that's enticing. Obviously, you want those things bought and paid for to make it easier for you to, what you think, live your life, right? If you don't have to work, we're just going to go off and do art and stuff like that and be, make super,
right.
Make use of our lives that way. But that's, not quite how it works. So I think one of my biggest takeaways from this book is just seeing, how he's kind of mapping this ideology now, or his now, which is back in the 40s, 50s, and seeing how a lot of the same tactics, euphemisms, and changing of language are applied today.
Changing of language one is, can you hear me all right? Yeah. I realized that do I sound the same as I did? Because I realized
you did. Yeah,
I do sound the same as I did the last time. Yes. I thought, because it sounded kind of echoey. Do I sound different now?
Mm-hmm.
Is it better or worse?
Probably worse. A little worse.
And then back to how I was. It sounded just kind of echoey. It sounded kind of echoey to me, so that's why I was wondering. Okay, so the changing of language, I think that's a good point. And how you you don't come up with new words. You just hijack the old ones so people think they're agreeing, to stuff. I don't know. I know we said we're not going to just do a general summary of the book, and we'll just talk about, what kind of some of our favorite parts are. I think for me, the thing that has stood out most, I don't know if stood out's the right word, has endured the most whenever I reflect on on this book, is I think Hayek helped me understand our ideological opponents better, and I guess, help put a fine point on maybe their tactics and their goals, in a way that I didn't previously have. I think one of the most important, we talked about this before, I think yesterday, one of the most important things I think that anyone who is, you could say, is involved in this culture war, is red pilled or whatever, it's just really important to understand kind of where you are, the situation you're in, who you're up against, what you're up against, what resources are available to them, what resources are available to you, etc. And one of the things that, I think we see is that a lot of the people who would maybe be identified as, part of the opposition to maybe the left or wokeness or whatever you want to call it, they're doing some good things. And of course, right here, I'm painting with incredibly broad strokes. They're doing some good things, but it's safe to say that there's a lot of, those on the outside who are trying to fight against this thing, that don't have a very good picture of what they're up against. And I think one of the things that Hayek, I think, helped me understand really well is So in the chapter, I think it's the death of truth or the end of truth,
Yeah.
when he
11.
talks about, when he talks about the need for censorship and how like everything has to support the rightness of the plan, and how there can't be anything that even represents an alternative to the plan, to what those in charge want, because that's a threat, because it makes it seem like you don't have to do what it's not our way or the highway. There are other options available. And so that's like where he says, like, it can't just be, oh, we're going to do this, but we actually have to rally all of the means of information, everything that everything that is a legitimizing like mechanism. So universities, whatever, all of that has to be in lockstep with kind of what we're doing. And we can't allow there to be anything that would even shed doubt. And so like the reason why that's important to understand is it kind of helps explain the asymmetry of the left and kind of those fighting, you know, what you might say like progressive ideology, or what I've called far left orthodoxy, or whatever, wokeness, whatever you want to call it. Like there's this huge asymmetry between what they want and their goals to get there of this ideology, and those opposed to it, what we want, and you know how we would get there. And the asymmetry is, we envision a world where we coexist with them. We don't envision a world where they don't exist, right? We're like, yeah, like, you know, the best example is, I'm like, yeah, dumbass Portland can do whatever dumbass Portland wants to do. I don't care. Like, I care about human suffering, but like, I'm not trying to, if Portland wants to fall on its face, like, that's fine. They can do that. But the people in Portland care a lot about what Texas does and what Florida does, because it's the same thing as what Hayek is describing. He's saying the Nazis had to censor all this stuff because the existence of alternatives to them weakens their power. It represents a threat, just inherent, just by existing. It represents a threat. So Texas and Florida represent threats to California and Portland, even though Texas and Florida aren't trying to govern California and Portland. They're not. They're like, you can, and New York, they're like, you can do whatever you want. But California sees them as threats because it represents that alternative, and that's why they have to be stopped. And so my point is that Hayek using censorship as the example, and suppressing truth, suppressing information, hijacking things like math. And I love that he has this thing about math in there, you know, like that long ago, and we've seen that today, right?
Yeah.
I think it helps us understand the mentality of what we're up against, and it puts like a maybe a finer point on some of the political battles that we have right now, and just this asymmetry. And you know, the way I've heard it described is, there's, if you have a side that envisions a multipolar order, that envisions multiple things existing, and it's up against a side that only envisions a unipolar order, that's like, no, the only ones in power are going to be us. The side that wants the multipolar order is going to lose every single time, because they just, the tactics they're going to take are very, very different, because they don't see it as zero sum, because that is kind of evil in a lot of ways. But the other side does see it as zero sum. And so they're just going to do things and operate and use different paradigms and strategies that just aren't available to those, you know, who want to coexist with them. But I think that chapter on the end of truth helped me understand that. And it helped me understand, I guess, you know, it put a fine point on maybe the moral bankruptcy of this stuff. Like the fact that it's willing to corrupt like legitimate knowledge, like actual facts, actual science, for its own like power goals, means that like it literally is not beholden to anything other than its own power. And that includes like making things work, like things actually working well, you know, like just on a practical level. So I just think all of that is pretty important. And that to me, like seeing like, I think I even did a video about this, or I talked about it in one of our conversations with the COVID stuff of like, why did they have to suppress like people using like ivermectin, or like they don't even talk about vitamin D, which is like they don't even talk about like, yeah, go and get some sun or lose some weight with COVID, right? Because that makes it seem like, oh, so there's kind of other ways that I could be healthy through this, other than just like wear 5 masks and get, now, I don't know if you saw, but their FDA is about to approve a 4th shot. Anyway, I just have to laugh at this shit. But anyway, and so like, it makes sense, like why they would do that, even if it's stuff that's factually true, because it's a threat. It represents a threat.
Actually true or helpful.
Correct.
It's insane that we don't, when we talk about predisposed to certain illnesses and putting yourself at risk. We talk a lot about the things you can't control, like the schools say you can't bring peanuts to school because some kid has a peanut allergy. That's something that at least that person can't control. His parents could probably do a better job of managing it, but not my place to say. But to say obesity is the top, like not even close, is the top factor when leading to the cause of death and hospitalization and COVID, you can't talk about that at all.
Nope.
So it's like something that would be useful to help solve this problem or to help people avoid problems like this in the future. We can't say, there's obviously healthy at any size movement that really hurts this, but I think it's just the obfuscation of allowing people to help themselves. It's got to be government that's helping you. And also it's happens to help these corporations that are going to make billions on these types of drugs that are, helping, the benefactors that are in government. But the government, the whole point here is the government needs to provide the solution. There cannot be choice here. We don't want to have treatments, because treatments like ivermectin would say that there's this choice that's not provided by government that's out there. And we're not really okay with that. It has to be this one choice provided by government, because we have to get you used to relying on the government for the solutions that you're looking for. And once you can build that mentality, and like we've talked about before, there's a whole bunch of other things that are outside of just the drugs and the actual disease and this whole COVID thing that is going to transform, or we're going to see how much it has transformed America up to this point. But I mean, like you said, the isolation from the truth is such a big part of that, because this allowed the government and these companies, free market companies, quote unquote, to isolate people from the truth. And we're going to see now people openly advocating for the isolation of the truth. We're going to start to see people, when you post something, especially around election time, you're going to see it a whole bunch of, they're going to look at this and like, how can someone post this free speech on Twitter? How can someone post this free speech on Facebook without getting censored, or at least, fact check that's, in front of the whole post to say this is misleading information. And we're moving from, Orwell's 1984 to Huxley's A Brave New World. We are putting this on ourselves. We are telling ourselves and our community to say, no, you cannot say these things. It's not the government who's going to be feeding this propaganda. The government is teaching the people how to feed themselves the propaganda. And that's what's extremely, extremely dangerous. That end of truth is a super scary chapter. And there's a whole bunch of things we can go in here is how truth is ending, or when it comes to science, she talks about plenty in this chapter, science and experts, that the science we are seeing today is science with the trademark over the E. It's not actual science, because actual science is very inconvenient for other truths that will arise from it, but only when we can apply it in certain areas. And we're going to call it, misinformation when applied in areas that we don't like.
Yeah, Brett and Heather talked about in one of their streams the other day that it's malinformation. Malinformation is information that's true but makes you distrust the government. So it still has to be censored.
Yeah.
And one thing I think that, I try to be careful about, picking what like contemporary anecdotes I want to use to illustrate, points, because I don't want to be just reactionary to stuff. But I think the fact that despite the fact that it's talked about a lot, the fact that Hunter Biden's laptop, like what happened with that around the election, getting, everything, they just called it, those who didn't ignore it called it Russian misinformation. despite the fact
the experts,
it would,
right? The unnamed,
right.
several few in the deep state
Yep.
that, have credibility. Yeah, they use them.
Despite the fact that the Biden campaign did not even deny, they didn't deny one single thing about it. Yeah. Not one.
Biden actually went up. Biden actually spoke publicly about him saying this is probably Russian disinformation, even when he knew it wasn't.
Yeah. But if you remember, he only said that after there were other people that started saying it was Russian disinformation. They just ignored it. My point is their first move wasn't to deny it or say anything. They picked up and parroted the defense that media and there were people in the State Department saying that. Like, it was wild. And they picked it up after those people were already saying it. But the fact that, so just two examples, I think that are really good in terms of understanding, the fact that we right now, the dials turn down actually still pretty low on how bad it is, and they turn it up as needed when it happens. So lab leak hypothesis is racist. It's misinformation. You have people like Peter Daszak and the Eco Health Alliance, getting these people to write these papers saying that it immediately must be a conspiracy theory. It gets called a conspiracy theory. They're going after people's jobs. You're just saying we have to entertain this as an idea, right? We have to at least. And people were getting kicked off of social media. That's censorship, bro. People were getting, just by saying clearly it's possible this came from a lab. And it's all about convenience, right? Because, after the election's over, well, yeah, it's of course it's, again, I've mentioned this before, but Jon Stewart went on Colbert and said all that, and people were like, oh, Jon Stewart said it. And it's no, nothing changed. Trump just wasn't in office anymore. This is not a good thing. This is not a good thing. Better late than never doesn't apply here. And the same with the laptop thing. You got the New York Times admitting that it's real, that Hunter Biden's laptop is real. This happened just this week.
Yeah, they sunk it in, paragraph 26. But
right.
But yes, they confirmed
it. But they had confirmed it was real, which means all of the things about Hunter Biden selling Joe's influence, paying money for the big guy, all of this stuff, and him being on the, this working for this was a Ukrainian energy company or whatever, all of this, it's just that's all real. No one, that's not planted. That's not Russian disinformation, but no one gives a shit, right? People will just, Ben Shapiro will bitch about it on the Ben Shapiro show. I'll do a however long this is going to end up being rant about it. But but the general population doesn't care. They memory hole it. They literally ignore it because it's it is an inconvenient thing. They see what happens to the people who actually do at the time go, this laptop is real. And it's what Tocqueville talked about. The social pressures are way, way, way more powerful. And so it's just easier to just go with the flow and hands off and ignore it. And it shows the other problem is, and I wrote about this in the piece I wrote about what's at stake in the election, was that they got away with all of this. And now they found a formula. They found a recipe. They found what works to make sure that their power isn't threatened. Because they just will do stuff and see what works and what they can get away with. Yeah. And they were able to get away with that type of thing. And then you would think that they would keep doubling down on the lie, right? But they don't have to. They can just bring it back. I mean, like you said, they buried it in a later paragraph, but they still said it because they know okay, who's going to care? No one on our side's going to care. Mm-hmm. No one because everyone on our side's going to go, yeah, well, it was necessary at the time because we had to get.
No one on their side's going to know. There's a whole bunch of things that you ask and I'm not talking about crazy progressive. I'm talking about liberal. I'm talking about someone who puts a Joe Biden sign in their lawn or any Democrat sign in their lawn. You ask them how many people died on January 6th, and they're going to tell you 5 or whatever the original number was, because it's a New York Times trick. They're going to bury it, 10 months later in the middle of some other piece on something else random, and that's just a way to slide by the truth. So they can make the claim that we covered this, right? We didn't end truth. The truth is right there. It's maybe a little late because we need to verify it, make sure it wasn't Russian disinformation, and do all this stuff. But now they have all those buzzwords and phrases that allow them to slowly push truth out. And like the whole point is, and the point of the chapter is to isolate people from the truth. That's what they wanted to do. So when you talked about truth there,
or to make the truth toxic, to make you isolate them from the truth, or isolate the truth from them, for them to go, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I don't want to know. I don't want that. I just want the surface because I see what happens. I would rather just, I'm good. Like, I don't like make it where they're not even, where they understand that there's a cost to even trying to pursue truth and try to understand what's true.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And when you were talking about the kind of that asymmetry of, some people want to, like, I don't care what people in California does. I don't care what people in Seattle do or Portland do, but they care what we do. It's also kind of isolating the people from the truth in there. So to me, it reminds me of East-West Germany. East Germany built a wall not to keep the West Germans out. They built it to keep their people in. And that's what they want to do. And they see, people when they finally are fed up with all the high taxes and the policies that have homeless all over their streets, and they can't, walk their children out, and then they're crummy schools. And then they end up wanting to move to places like Texas. Well, they got to spread out that wall and spread out that influence. And that's why they care, because they see people, the everyday people who believe in their BS and still vote for their people, start to see the truth collapsing, or the fake propaganda collapsing around them. And then they go out somewhere else, and they're eventually going to find that truth. So they have to keep infecting the rest of the country with this ideology. Whereas the other side, we've talked about this as, a defense. It's not actually a defense. It's a defense that helps them. As the other side just says, well, we you can have your own opinions, and as long as it doesn't affect me, that's fine. But the problem is, when you have that attitude, when you say, I will not use the power that's here and available and already created, I'm not going to use this weapon that has been created, as admirable as that is, when the weapon's there, it's there, right? And actually, one of the bigger takeaways that I would have given you when you asked me that first question, but I had no idea we were going to talk about the book today. So, from chapter 1 and 2, he started out right away. The chapter 1 is the abandoned road. Chapter 2 is the great utopia. It's him explaining, this is the road. We abandoned the road that's given all this prosperity, that created America, all these ideas, and the idea of a free man, and then everyone's got the same worth, and these ideas that are very, very new at the time. We built this great place, and we were down the road to prosperity, and now we're abandoning that road to go down the road of utopia, which is not a real place by definition. It's not attainable. And he explains that part, but what he doesn't get into, maybe it's just a product of his time, or more libertarian, or what he'd say European liberal ideology, is when the conservatives, libertarians take power, they decide to not abandon the road down to serfdom. They just take a picnic there, and they say, well, we're not going to do anything, and you're going to enjoy this 2 to 4 years of us not doing anything.
But it's going to press pause.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, you're not changing the road. You're not going the other direction. You just take a picnic there, and then you expect, things will be good for a short period until the next people take over, who have this, really regressive or progressive ideology to keep you going down the road to utopia, the road to serfdom. And that's an attitude we need to change. And it's an attitude our politicians need to change. It's an attitude we need to change ourselves. And we can't have this hands-off ideology. It's like, I'm not going to use this power because that means the power can be corrupted and used against me. Well, the power is already there. You can't, as we talked about yesterday, I don't want to create more power. I don't want to enlarge the power. I don't want the people I vote for to get in office and add legislation and restrictions to cryptocurrency, because there's really nothing there right now. But once those restrictions are added by the people who I don't really vote for, well, the next time, my people get in, they have to use that power. They can't just say, we're not going to use it, because it's going to be used next time. So you got to use that power to do good when it's available. Doesn't mean to create new power, but it doesn't mean you need to ignore that when it's there, because then it's just a slower progress toward whatever utopian dreams that the people, who have not the greatest intentions, sometimes great intentions, but, as the saying goes, sometimes great intentions lead to the worst outcomes. So, use power when it's there.
Yeah. And that was a really important distinction that you brought up the other day of just like, yeah, there's a difference between creating new power and expanding your power and utilizing what you have. Like, I think, the example that I gave, and I've even given this in episodes of, whenever, I think Curtis Yarvin talked about it of like, whenever he gives the example of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and people say, why doesn't Gandalf put on the ring? Well, because if Gandalf puts on the ring, he just becomes Saruman, like by seizing that power, it would corrupt him. But that's not the same. But like that him putting on the ring would be him seeking out a corrupt power. That's not to say Gandalf didn't get more powerful in the books. He did. He went from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White. Power is the only thing that restrains power, period. And, like I said before we started, like, why don't we mess with North Korea? Why doesn't anyone? Because they have nukes. That's it, the end. Like, and so they have power and they therefore get to have sovereignty. And conservatives want sovereignty, but they don't understand that you have to have power in order to have sovereignty. Otherwise, you are just hoping that whatever is in power will leave you alone. And hope is not a strategy. That is not a strategy. But that's the strategy that they often take. Is, well, just leave me alone. Like, I don't want to, okay, yeah, but what are you going to do? Like, you have to be able to, like, no is only, the word no in relationships, in life, whatever, is only as strong or as impactful as what happens if it isn't enforced, right? So, like, if you say, hey, I would like to come into your house, and I say no, and you say, okay, but I'm going to come into your house anyway. Like, unless I have the ability to shoot you or keep you from doing that, like, that word no is meaningless. And so we have all these conservatives who are just like, no to this, no to that, no to that. But they're yes to sovereignty, but they don't understand that they have to have power or do something with that power when they do get it in order to maintain that sovereignty and that freedom that they so desire. And I understand, like, where they're coming from. This is a perspective that I have held, before, but like, I just think it's super duper naive. And so to your point, like, yeah, you to not do anything with that, to just picnic on that road. I think one of the things that he mentions in that first chapter is, basically the idea, we had this road that brought us to prosperity, and that's the abandoned road. And it was freedom and individual choice and like liberalism in a good sense. And as things got better and people started saying, well, we're not progressing fast enough, progress isn't happening. And so they started viewing the methods that and the processes that and the principles that got us here, that got them to that point, as like burdens and barriers to be discarded rather than processes and principles to be protected. And like, they were able to do that because they were able to start discarding those things because there was no power constraining their ability to do so. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's one, well, go ahead and give your thoughts on that, but I had something else.
Well, when it comes to, that power, there's a quote that I've heard that's similar. I mean, it has a sentiment that, like, basically no one has killed more people than a pacifist. Like, that the pacifism kills people because you can look at this world like it's a place that you ought to lead by example. You don't want to be violent. You don't want to hurt people. You don't want to start war. None of us ought to want to start war. But just because you have that belief does not mean the world around you is going to conform to whatever you believe. Exactly. And when you sit there and don't use your power, it's the way that, I teach my kids about bullying in school. It's like there's three types of kids. There is the bully, there's the ones who gets bullied, and then the most people is the category that doesn't get bullied, but is not the bully, but sits there as a bystander. It's like, if you find yourself in the third category, it is you who should step in and try to stop the bully. It is you who needs to protect the people who can't protect themselves. And that's extremely important. Obviously, you can take that, you don't want to be the bully of the bullies and then control everyone. And that's a way to, corrupt yourself.
There's a pathological version of that.
Sure, but again, you can't just sit there and do nothing. And then when it comes to, the Lord of the Rings analog, when Luke Skywalker has the ring, or I think I might have got the name wrong. But yeah, when he has the ring of power, there's a volcano there he can throw away and dissipate the power. Where is the volcano for us? What happens when power is created in real life with real government? Is there a way to just destroy that? But if there was a way to do it, then yes. I think in a lot of these cases, yes, you absolutely destroy the ring, you destroy the power there, but there's no way to do it here,
Correct.
especially when it comes to a government within the country. And then, like you said,
power is always preserved.
It's always exactly. Preserved. And then when you go outside of the country, there is a way to, I suppose, dissipate power, but dissipate your own power. It's like, okay, well, denuclearize. That's a way to disarm yourself. But in reality, does that dissipate power? It dissipates your power, but in effect, this gives it to someone else who has those weapons, who is now more powerful, who now can control you. So as much as we don't want to distill this down, because this power game, this believing everything's about power is very much a mode of the left, very much a mode of this progressivism to distill everything down to power. But it doesn't mean it's not a reality. It doesn't mean that power doesn't exist. It doesn't mean you're not supposed to wield it for good when you have it, because it's already there.
Yeah. And the left makes things about power in a corrupt way, right? They don't talk about just the realities of it. The reason I just love the fact that so much of any particular leftist opinion or hot take or whatever is just projection, or just any of just their, just general tenets are projection. And one of those is that those in power use power to maintain their own power and legitimacy, and corruption, and other, the minorities and the people who aren't in power. It's like, no, this is just what they do with power, right? And so, but it, like you said, it's always preserved. And I think it's interesting how, well, I don't know, you tell me, like, would you say that this idea of, like, just kind of realizing the hard reality of that, of what you said, we don't have a volcano, like, it'd be nice, I agree, but we don't. And so, like, understanding that really what we are kind of a lot of our problem boils down to either taking power in a way that is going to actually matter. Cause I've talked about this in videos about just orders of magnitude, and how, like, it's not, you have to know how much power you need in order to get the outcome you want. And if what you're doing is only going to get you, 1/95th of that, then you're probably wasting your time. And so, it's kind of that Machiavelli thing. Like, if you're going to go for the king, like, aim for the head, otherwise don't go for the king. And so it's like, I think that, I promise there's a question here. I think one of the things that I have changed the most on over the last year, probably less, is just understanding the relationship that we have with power, and, like, kind of just the reality of it, of how things are. This is how it is. You either have to have a lot of it, or find ways to avoid its, like, being in its crosshairs. But there isn't really a middle ground. Anything other than finding a way to make it where it doesn't impact you, or actually removing it and taking it for yourself, is a failed strategy. And so, like, I think that's something that I would definitely, I remember not that long ago, it was probably like a year and a half ago. It was either Matt Walsh, or it wasn't Walsh. It was Michael Knowles. I think I even talked to you about of Knowles. I even started a essay article about it, of Walsh talking about, like, what's the point of having power if you don't use it? It was Knowles. Yeah, it was Knowles talking about that. And I think I even, like, called you and asked you about it after. It's just like, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. This is everything. But he's right. He's right. Now, he's right in principle. I don't know what he means about that. Like, practically, again, you can't be growing the power, right? But you have to engage with the reality you have without making it worse. And that's a difficult needle to thread. But not engaging with that reality or engaging very poorly with that reality is a very common mistake. And I think it's something that I definitely fell into not that long ago, and is, probably something that I've changed on in fairly recent times. And I think one of the things that helped me change on that was Hayek helping me understand those dynamics. But I don't know. It seems like that's something that you've kind of changed your mind on too.
Yeah. Oh, a ton. I'm open about, stuff that I've changed my mind on. Like I always tell people, I was once the much revered Mitt Romney conservative before 2016. I didn't vote for Trump in 2016, and between November 2016 when he was elected to January of 2017 when he actually took office, I changed my mind on Trump in that short amount of time because of the way the powerful were treating him, and just, they're trying to impeach him before he ever took office, and I saw the corruption there. But yeah, I mean, it's within, I would say, the last year that I went from more of the conservative libertarian aspect. And if anyone here listens to my last live stream on my locals community, they'll know how much I railed against the more libertarian side of not taking action on these things. And even if you read my early writings, a lot of it was very libertarian. A lot of it was like, do not create weapons that can just be used against you. And it really just resounded to, don't ever create power ever there, and or don't ever use power ever, even when it's there, don't use it. And now my mind is completely flipped on this. Michael Knowles is actually a really good example of someone has a more unique opinion than others at the Daily Wire that do have the more traditional, what we consider traditional conservative lane of just not doing anything. Any day that something doesn't get done in government's a good day. Well, it's a good day for a very short time, but you're gonna
if you're gonna be in power indefinitely, that'd be fine, but you're not.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just realizing that you have to use the tools that are there to try to maintain or create that liberty that we kind of completely forgot of. I mean, liberty is like, I feel like I've never even heard it in the news recently, just because it's just kind of this forgotten idea that no one really takes seriously anymore. To think that I can go out without a mask because I just, let's put this, a couple of months ago, I can go out without a mask and I don't have to be, have people shaming me saying I'm not protecting grandma because I'm not going out without a mask is an insane thing to think of if we put ourselves back in 2010 before all this craziness happened, and just how all of these big inflection points in our society has shown that like you said, is this a battle? It's a battle worth fighting, but is it a battle that can even be fought? Like, what are we fighting here? And like we've talked about a couple of months ago, something I've kind of changed my mind on in a pretty big way. And it's something we talked about before, we started the live stream, or I think we talked about it yesterday, the day before, is the idea of that dual society, the dual economy, where you have right-wing credit cards and right-wing, establishments of different kinds.
Can we make a different category for that? Instead of saying it's right-wing, we could just say dissident, or out, like something that is not under the thumb of progressive politics. Like it is just detached. Like, so the example I'd say is, just because the Daily Wire makes a movie doesn't make it a right-wing movie. It just means that it's a movie that's detached from the progressive politics of Hollywood. Now, it might be a right-wing movie, but I think what we're talking about are things that operate within the purview and influence of the cathedral, the establishment, whatever, and that which does not. So I think it's limiting to call it right. Is that fair?
I think it's fair. I could argue why it's not, but I don't think it's worth our time here. But anyway, that dual economy, that way that we build all of these different parallel institutions for the people who believe in liberty and freedom and all the stuff that used to make America America, and then the crazy liberal, the crazy progressive institutions that are just kind of the institutions that'll just stay there. I used to think that would be a horrible thing. I used to think that was a horrible future. And today, I think that's the best case scenario. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily something I want, but like, what are the alternatives? That everything just gets corrupted and turned into what they want, and now I have to go outside and ask everyone their pronouns before I address them ever again. And even like my wife, every single morning I got to wake up, what pronouns are you using today, hon? It's this weird reality that we think is silly when we talk about it now, but is so realistic and real when you think about the way the trajectory we've been going on lately. I mean, we're making fun of these videos of the female swimmer who's actually a man, and they have the overlaid South Park I forgot what the wrestler's name was.
Go strong woman.
Yeah, but it's based on the wrestler's voice. The
Randy Savage.
Guy. Yeah, Randy Savage. There we go. And that episode was made a couple of years ago, and it was funny back then, even though some people were beginning to really take it seriously. And now it's like, that's reality. This is what's happening now. Like it's men crushing women in women's sports, and something else. I think Michael Knowles actually does a really good job at explaining this. It's not, some people are out there saying we're going to kill women's sports. Women's sports effectively going to be over. And Knowles, who's not really big into sports, but has a pretty profound, observation on it, is like, who cares about sports? This has nothing to do about sports. This has everything to do about truth. When you end truth, when you end a simple objective truth, like men are men and women are women, we no longer speak the same language. So when they're asking Ketanji Brown, the Supreme Court candidate right now, can she define a woman? And she does not refuse to answer the question, even though it's a very smart political move, unfortunately for her. That should be a question asked by anyone who's going to be going into government or creating any sort of policy, because it's not a litmus test for your determination of man and woman. It's a litmus test to your determination of, is truth, or are we going to live with separate truths? And truth is going to become subjective. And now it's, anything can mean anything. It's the Thomas Sowell quote that you can make any claim true by changing the definition of just one word. Yeah. And that is the reality you're going to live in. And when I talk to especially progressives about this, it's like, I don't know how you can expect someone who cannot declare what a man is and what a woman is to do a policy that's going to help us with climate change. Climate change is a very technical, very, very difficult subject to grapple with, because it's got so many variables involved with it. But now when we can't agree on the same language, especially in a scientific field, like how can you take anything that they say as truth, because they can make anything be a reality now,
because ideology trumps truth for them 100 times out of 100.
Yeah. And that's, again, going back to this episode, the end of truth. When you destroy truth, it's the kind of grounding point of our language. There has to be objective truth if we're going to speak the same language. And when you get rid of that, now anything can mean anything, and you can sell people on a whole bunch of bad ideas, even if it's well-intentioned. A whole bunch of bad ideas, and really buy into some horrible things, especially horrible things will be coming down the line.
Yeah. And, I think not only do I agree with you that like building parallel economies and parallel institutions is like best case scenario. Like, I don't see that as like, I guess we'll do this. I actually think it's an offensive strategy as well, because of what I mentioned earlier about creating just the existence of alternatives to their stupid plans and their stupid ideas and what they're doing. Like, it is a way of building power. They are building influence. They are building although clearly not always, something functioning well and actually being competent is a form of power, right? Like, being good at what you do gives you power and gives you influence. And so as long as if we have things that are creating that, if you have a university that is just teaching people like just physics and science and chemistry and geology and whatever, and it's not doing this stuff, and it's creating actual people who are competent, and they don't have all this crap that's like bogging down any potential competence they might have, like that's a form of power, because you're competent at what you do. Like, who has more power, Patrick Mahomes or some joke quarterback that no one's ever heard of, playing for some rookie team in Europe, right? Like,
no,
Kirk Cousins. Tua. Anyway, but like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just, and so I think it's a good strategy, because one, it forces them to have to, they will start attacking. They already do that, right? But it makes them look silly. And so I think it weakens the other, like the progressives, it further weakens the institutions. It puts a spotlight on things that do work, and it shows an alternative. Like it shows like, yeah, these exist. Like you don't have to do all the stupid things that they want to do. And so I think that that's a form of power, and I think it's useful. And I think it also is like, it's just a good survival strategy, right? Like, the example that I've given before about this stuff with these people is like, this is I think in some cases, I don't think in all cases, but in some cases, these things are eventually going to collapse on themselves. They're always going to have enough people to sustain them. I think that's true, but they won't always have enough people to make them relevant or powerful or whatever. And so like the point is that you want to have something that's standing, that is outside of the field of the debris and rubble that's going to happen when they collapse on themselves, that whenever the dust settles, there's this other thing standing there that people will gravitate to. You want to have a replacement waiting in the wings.
Sure.
And so,
or if there's not a replacement there, it's that idea of making yourself anti-fragile. Do not be in the rubble when it falls.
Or it does not matter to you. Yeah, the collapse is either way. Ideally, you want to be able to profit from it.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So I think it is the smartest thing. I used to have this idea of reform, and I've mentioned before about how like there is a like optimism on the other side of the black pill. Like whenever the more the more time you spend like understanding like how bad this stuff is. And I think that's also why like whenever we think about how Hayek would write some of this stuff today, like he would have some different views on stuff, because he would realize like how bad it kind of got, and how authoritarianism, shifted, from overt to like, this kind of bureaucratic oligarchy kind of thing. But I think what's behind that is saying like, oh, if Hayek understood how bad it is, he would have different views. And I think as I've started to understand like, okay, how I don't know if bad is not the right word, but like just how intractable this problem is, like how overwhelming it is. It's just like, it is just so much easier to just build something different than it is to try and reform and try to go and take them on. Because again, you're not, unless you can take the head. What happened whenever Thor missed Thanos' head? Snap, right? Like you better aim for the head or don't take a shot at all. Like you better hit. If you're going to aim, you better hit. And a lot of people are it's just pea shooters. It's like, the kid who's being bullied, like trying to swing at the bigger kid, and the bigger kid's just got the hand out, like just holding their head, and they just, that's what it is. And so, but building up this other stuff, I think is much, much more effective than trying to reform or try to get this cancer out.
Yeah. Can I switch subjects really there? It's somewhat related. It's related to the book, at least, real fast.
Did we get Tyreek Hill back to the Chiefs? What's going on?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that's the post debate. You got to pay for that to subscribe. But now, real quick before I change subjects, I do want to give a shout out to John, or at Red.5. Commented after I put a post in there. I don't know if he's listening right now, but he did comment in the locals community. But his excuse was, I don't know. His wife literally just had a baby. He's like, I just saw this. I really, really want to watch it, but there's a baby there. So hopefully you can listen to this eventually, John. And congratulations.
He's got a girl, right? Little girl.
Yeah, girl.
Congrats, man.
Got the name here. I just don't know if we're going to say names on YouTube. I'm probably going to avoid that.
Monique.
Except for his name's John. Look up John. Go after John. No, I was kidding. Real quick, chapter 3 is labeled individualism and collectivism. When we're talking about, going over chapters here, like we said, we're not going to just go over this as a review, but we kind of want to go over things and see what is actionable out of it, what you can pull out of it as kind of changing your worldview. And chapter 3, when he compares individualism and collectivism and saying they're naturally at odds, I think now this really makes me think of especially going on my really Ayn Rand rant of a couple of weeks ago. This kind of springs in my mind that he says not all forms of collectivism or planning are bad unless they move against competition. That's an important thing. And we have this idea, this Ayn Randian idea is what I'd call it, that the free market ought to be free, And it doesn't matter if a company gets too big or powerful or keeps out all the competition because they just buy them up. I'm thinking about people like Alphabet, some people like Amazon, although Amazon still kind of competes in a free market still. But these huge corporations who just buys up the competition is now just as bad as planning because they're eliminating competition. And I want to just explain that it's not always a fear of government. It's the fear of this power that cannot be challenged by anyone. And there's these companies now that are just, you got to say Alphabet's almost just as powerful, at least as the, US government, and certainly much more powerful than most governments around the world. The things they can do, the propaganda they can sell, the information that they can shut down, the truth that they can allow not to get out there, and the stuff that they can push as kind of these alternative facts.
I would say they are as powerful as the US government because there's no way anyone who is honest could make the claim that a bipartisan or unpolitical Google, bipartisan unpolitical YouTube, bipartisan unpolitical Facebook, unpolitical Twitter, that if those existed, that Trump would not be president right now. He absolutely would be. He absolutely would be. It would have been an absolute massacre at the polls. But
my point is, the actionable thing is, when I began to leave this Mitt Romney conservative thing, I was I was in this really popular Facebook group that was this kind of anti-Trump conservative thing, and I was in there way past when I was anti-Trump. I don't think I'd ever consider myself anti-Trump, but I was in there for way too long. And, I was making these arguments to these people that I thought could still be savaged and were not actively working on the side they pretended to oppose.
Savaged or salvaged? Were you trying to destroy them or save them? Okay.
No.
Sorry. I was like, I don't understand what's happening.
No.
He's either trying to help them or kill them.
But it was surrounding the Biden election and how, like you said, it was these massive companies working basically on behalf of Democrats that had all this power. And the excuse continuously was, but freedom of speech is only for the government. And, limiting choice is only for the government. There's all these different things that we used to mimic, we used to say, we used to believe in. And kind of my action here is like, follow the principle. Don't follow that, explicit rule you made up because it made sense back then, right? When they said, freedom of speech, they had the government in mind because that was the most powerful thing. It doesn't mean that we don't evolve and we see now more powerful companies that are much more powerful than governments around the world. And like you said, just as powerful as the most powerful government in the world. Don't limit that principle to just the government. Anything that's restricting power in economic terms, anything that is restricting, competition is going to be a net negative for everyone else. And don't just follow the principle that you just got to hate the government or want to limit the government or do nothing with the government. You have to act. You have to, act against or don't support these massive corporations that are trying to accomplish the same thing as a government, but just more efficiently and effectively right now.
So there's a question in the YouTube chat. Someone named Chrono Loop says, to build what you guys were talking about before, what would be the individualist do to create a counter/alternative to leftist unions? So if I understand first off, thank you for the question.
Yeah.
If I understand the question, you're kind of like saying, can we build hey, what's up, James? Can we build or counter unions? And so what I would say is, so there's two strategies, right? And I kind of mentioned them, but these are the things that I think about here. So the example I've given in like some videos or conversations in the past is that like, just because you have to pay tribute to the king doesn't mean that you have to live right next to the castle. And it also doesn't mean like you have to enlist your kids in the army, right? Like, and go and work in the castle. What you could do, if you don't think you can take a legitimate shot at him, if you realize like, if I just show up at the castle gates every day with a sword challenging the king to a duel, eventually someone's just going to kill me. So the other thing to do is to remove yourself from the influence of power. So when it comes to unions, what can an individuals do to create or counter, an alternative to unions? Well, the alternative to unions is not union, right? Like the alternative is they should not exist. I actually think that they made sense at one point in time, to be honest. People don't know a lot about, kind of the Gilded Age and where a lot of this kind of early anti-capitalist sentiment came from, with like corporation towns, like that were run very much like what communism would be, except, there's an elite group that you work for, and they, the way these towns would work is you work for the company, maybe the railroad or something, the factory, and then you'd get your salary, but then you'd go and buy everything from the store that they also owned. And then you lived in some, little shanty that they also owned and rented to you or whatever. And they just got all the money back. Like you just got, like your labor was just nothing. Right. And so like their unions made sense at one point in time. They really did.
And just real quick, Hayek does talk about unions real quick. And the way he explains it is unions existed when the companies, the owners of the companies, had privileges over the people who worked for them. So privileges meaning rules that will help you at the expense of someone else. Unions did things to equalize that. And the problem with unions today is they're not trying to equalize it anymore. They are trying to create more privileges for the employer, but in reality, the union. So now you're
the unions developed its own self-interests. The union has its own self-interest.
That's why it's corrupted.
Right. But so to back to your question, Chrono, is like the alternative to unions is not unions. Now, I don't know about you, but I can't envision not unions, at least anytime soon, because they are so powerful, and they are one and the same with the government and one and the same with the Democratic Party. If you go to like Open Secrets and look up all of these, Open Secrets is a great website for looking up campaign contributions and stuff. Like some of the biggest donors in the country to Democratic super PACs and candidates are unions. Like there's different teachers unions, there's other municipal unions for municipal employees, city employees, different cities and stuff, whatever. So I can't envision a world without them anytime soon. Like at least I can't envision it and then go, okay, I see how we get there. Like it would look very different than this world. So like, I think that the best thing you can do is to take the other strategy is say, okay, if for whatever reason, let's say I don't know about your life, but the unions are negatively impacting you. Well, if you can't remove them, you just remove their power and their influence over you, over your life. And so as much as you can, you just remove yourself from the purview of that power. You become as independent as you can from whatever it is they're doing. That's that anti-fragility. I think so. To just kind of really briefly bracket explain whenever Kevin and I are talking about this. So Nassim Taleb talks about the anti-fragility, and his books are great. And it's all about understanding our relationship with randomness and trying to have a relationship with randomness to where whatever happens, in this domain or that domain, ideally you profit from it, but you want to just make it to where like randomness does not impact you in these different domains. He talks about like financial markets and stuff, but anyway, so, maybe an example, I don't know if this is a good one or not, but so whenever they put airbags, like side airbags in a car, they don't have different airbags. It's like, well, this airbag will only protect you if you get hit by a sedan, or this airbag will only protect you if you get hit by a semi or whatever. Like it's the airbag's there. It's just, the car doesn't know, the company doesn't know what's going to hit you over there. It's random. But they have something there so that no matter what happens over there, you're protected. Like they don't have to know the specifics. You just need to be protected from something happening in this domain. And so with the unions or whatever, or like, I think the left generally, or the cathedral, this kind of thing, I think it very much represents randomness in that we can't control it. We can't really predict it. You can predict it in some ways, but not really. And so I think the best thing you can do is develop a relationship with it where that no matter what it doesn't really impact you, or it impacts you as minimally as possible. And so I think with the unions, I think that's a better strategy, is to remove yourself from their influence rather than to try and build a counter to the union. Like I think the counter to the union is just not having it, And you don't build zero. Like you just remove it. And in order to do that, you would have to have enough power to remove those unions from power, which you don't probably. I know I don't.
Well, I think also too, when it comes to the powers there, therefore, utilize the power for those states that have allowed legislation to bolster the power of unions. There's also the opposite, using that power to do the opposite, doing a right to work state. So there are ways to kind of dissipate the power of the unions, but you have to use state power. Sitting on your hands and doing nothing is not going to do it. You actually have to utilize the power that's there.
So his follow-up question was, he was asking about unions because they do generate so many votes for the left, basically. And I think the answer is still the same, right? Like I conceptualize progressivism, this like leftist thing, the cathedral, as randomness, as something that I can't control personally. And so I would just rather, I think it's going to be a much more fulfilling and satisfying and stress-free life if you look at the domains, you look at your life and go, okay, are there some areas where they really negatively impact me? Okay, can I take power in that area to make it to where they can't do that anymore? If not, can I remove their influence from me in that area? And I think that's a better thing to do. I think that there are people, so here's just a contemporary example. And I'm not saying to become like this community, but I'm saying like there are some people who've done this very well. The Amish do not care at all about our politics. They just don't. And you know what? The left don't really care about the Amish. They don't, because the Amish aren't a threat to them. The Amish are as far removed to the edge of the kingdom, away from the castle.
Zero carbon.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, except for they burn wood and stuff, but yeah.
Right. But they don't care. The Amish aren't a threat to them. They don't even vote in our elections. Like they're just not a constituency that they care about. And so they live on the edge of the periphery of power. And so like, do you think, ask an Amish person, like how much they care about unions? Like they're going to go, what are you talking about? And so I'm not saying become Amish, but I'm saying that there are ways to generate a life and a lifestyle and communities where it's like, this just doesn't matter. This just doesn't matter. It's not super practical on a huge macro level. I'm not prescribing it on a macro level. I don't think that macro level solutions exist without lots of violence, to be honest. And I'm not even saying that would necessarily constitute a solution. I don't know. It just maybe just constitute regime change, and it'd be, meet the new boss, just like the old boss kind of thing. And so, but I would say on a micro level, for you, for your life, for me, for my life, I think there are ways that we can remove ourselves from the purview of their power and influence to where it's just like, it doesn't, the way I think about it, in this last thing I'll say, because we went from like 5, when I started talking, there were 5 people watching, and now there's 2. And I think one of them was me. Anyway, and the other one's probably you. But the last thing I'll say is, I think the best way to conceptualize it is, we want them to become to us what we are to them. What are we to them? Irrelevant. Our opinions don't matter. Our desires don't matter. We are not part of the math for them. We want them to become like that to us. We want to have the same relationship with them that they have with us. Doesn't matter what you think, what you do, whatever. I'm just going to live my life. That's how they view us. I think that's what we want. The best way is for us to build a life where that is a reciprocal relationship. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I think it's impossible, but it makes sense.
Well, go on, expand on that.
Yeah.
Impossible how?
To make us less interesting in them, I think for an ideology that only cares about power and gaining more of it, that's sort of impossible, I think, as long as you're there. The Amish will be left alone until everyone else is now forced into their camp. And then if the Amish are the only ones left, they'll care a little bit more. I don't know. There's still a small enough community that might not matter, but I like your advice, be as anti-fragile as you can. That'll be to your benefit. But I do think, unless you plan on going full on Amish or Mennonite or whatever, your chances of staying out of either their purview, or staying away from their propaganda is, impossible. Like I said, you could build shack in the woods, almost completely off the grid. But if you have one internet connection and you have one Netflix account, or, just that little bit of connection to the world that they want to control, they're in your house. There is no shacking up with your guns and keeping everyone out. If you want to be part of what's considered the modern world, the basic necessities include internet. Once you get to that point, you can't just insulate yourselves away from the world. It's impossible, especially when you have kids that are not going to want to stay in that insular community. It's basically going to be impossible to do that. So I think, we can't, and this is not your advice, but we can't just ignore the world at all. It's either you gotta, again, best case scenario seems to be building that parallel society. But worst case scenario is you're going to have to keep fighting. And if you take yourself out of the fight, well, it's going to come to you. It's going to come to your doorstep at some point.
Well, what I'm talking about is if you have a bunch of individuals who are doing what I just described, that is building a parallel society.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm just saying that I think for the vast majority of cases with this stuff, it is probably a fool's errand to try and wrestle power away from them, and a much, much more viable strategy to be as disinterested in their power as possible. That's why the Amish aren't a threat. They're not interested in their power, right?
It's a combination. They're not interested in their power, and they're small enough.
Right. And so, but I think that's a big part of it, is my point. So, like, I think if you are disinterested in their power, and you are, like, that's a good place to start. You're not trying to wrestle it from them. And if you're just building your own thing, like, don't get me wrong, the bigger, like, the bigger that looks like, then the more they're going to come after you, for sure. Like, totally. But it's just a different thing, them trying to come after you, as you're, like, building that power up and building those parallel things. Then you have the home field advantage there. They have the home field advantage if, like, you go and get elected to the school board and you're the only sane person there. Like, what are you going to do? Right. Like, and so that's my point. And I'm not saying to ignore them. I also disagree with you, though. Like, well, I don't know if I disagree, but, like, I'm not talking about trying to escape from their propaganda. You want to escape from their influence. And so, like, I see I feel like the description you're giving is less of parallel, more of a completely different plane of existence. It is. Let me finish what I'm saying, and you're right. It is a different plane of existence, because a parallel society to anything that's established by progressives exists in reality. They don't exist in reality, so it's going to be definitionally a different plane of existence. But okay. So the propaganda, you're not, like, yeah, I see their propaganda, I see their crap, like, it doesn't have any impact on my life. Like, it's not about removing their presence necessarily. It's about removing their, like, influence and their power they exert over your life. Like, it's turning them into a nuisance. Like, they're always going to exist.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, it's just, it's annoying. Like, they might be a nuisance to you, but it's a difference between, if I don't get the 5th vaccine, I'm going to lose my job. So I have to do what they say, or, oh, everyone else in my department is participating in this diversity thing, so I better do that, and, just shut my mouth.
Or I can't say Leah Thomas is a dude.
Exactly. It's the difference between that. It's the difference between that and, I work for myself, or I work for, someone who isn't going to try and do that. Like, it's annoying that there are these other people doing that, or I think it's unfortunate. Like, I see it, but it doesn't have influence over my life. So that's what I'm talking about. And a bunch of individuals doing that is building that parallel society. And really fast to expand on what Chrono. So it is a completely different plane of existence, but it's one that is basically, like, if you were to take the last 100 years, 130 years maybe, and remove, like, it is such an outlier in terms of just, like, all of human history. And so, just having a society where people just kind of live their lives and operate under, kind of the natural law in a lot of ways of, how would we treat each other if we were on like a desert island and there was no governing system? Like, what are the kind of the things that we would agree upon without having to have a conversation about it? For the most part, obviously there's going to be outliers. That's kind of what we're talking about. That's liberty, that's freedom. And that's kind of the way things have always been. Up until we got this kind of like bureaucratic super nanny state type thing. And so a bunch of individuals doing that, going to create a counter influence over the society, would you say? Yes, because again, they would create a counter example. And the thing about competence is that it's attractive. And like, I don't know about you, but whenever I look at people who are competent, people that are not under the influence of this stuff, they're way happier. I don't know about you, but that's what I see. Like, do you look at progressives and see them as being super happy? I don't. And the good thing about so just take the Soviet Union example, like the people didn't rise up, it just collapsed on itself. I think that this will be the same way, as it'll collapse on itself as it loses the support of people at the bottom. The right is really bad at creating converts, but the left is really good at alienating people and creating casualties and pushing them out. And so whenever people get pushed out and we have those casualties, having those parallel things to be like, look, there's an alternative thing here that you can be a part of or not be a part of. But you don't have to do this. You don't have to live this miserable life. Over here, it would influence society because it just creates an example. Like, I look at the people who are just like, you see these posts on Twitter, like the people who are still acting like COVID is the plague, and they're like wanting to they're going to get a fourth shot and they can't wait for a vaccine for their 3-year-old or something. Like, I mean, none of these people are happy. And so like, there's this principle in Christianity of living out your beliefs, of living in a way that is just attractive. Paul calls it having like this aroma of Christ, where people can tell that you're different and are attracted. They want what you have without you even mentioning it to them. And I think that obviously I'm not conflating conservatism with Christianity or salvation or anything like that, but I'm just saying, like, whenever someone is doing something or doing something in their life or living in a way that is attractive to you, that you can see as contrasted to your life, and it's appealing, like, you're going to gravitate to that thing. And this other thing is miserable, and it only creates casualties, and it operates out of fear, and it's effective in that way. But having the counter example, that's why they're interested in flipping Texas and Florida, because they have to get rid of the counter examples, because they know what they have is just miserable and it's not attractive.
It's actually a pretty interesting aside from Andrew Klavan's show on Friday. He talks about his message, especially to women, is very simple. It's like, you're going to enjoy, if you want to live an existence where you're a homemaker and you stay at home and you get to actually enjoy your life. He says, whenever he gives that advice, he gets women writing in that's like, my life has changed. It is amazing ever since I decided to take up this advice. It's great. And then he's like, go to the New York Times, especially the op-ed page. It is just a list of women who found out how horrible their lives are. It is just, every one of them is pissed off because they found out how bad their life is.
Fennessy talks about this a lot.
Yeah. And that's like this like insane difference between, like you said, they just make people really mad, or the truth tends to make people a lot happier. So it's a lot more, what I'd say, sustainable. And when you went into your, you disagreed and you said propaganda is not the same as influence. I think the problem is sustainability. If you build that kind of parallel society, you can defend yourself against propaganda because you can easily identify it. But how easily can your children identify it? How easily can your children's children identify it? If they are going to I don't think it's going to be as easy. And that's why I think places like America, who have this, great bastion of freedom, and Europe that was starting to go down the hole, it infected America, because slowly but surely new generations came where they were indoctrinated with propaganda, and that's much harder to defend yourself against.
It's different because one of the key components of that was public education.
Yeah.
And the university system. And so like, I just don't think that's a good, it's a good example of what happens when you're not vigilant. It's a good example of of how propaganda can be effective whenever you allow your children to be subjected to it 24/7. But like, how many of those people actually knew that's what was happening to their kids? Whereas it sounds like we're talking about is an instance where you know damn well what's going on and what's happening there with your kids. And so you're going to protect them to a certain degree. You're going to educate them to a certain degree, and you're going to model.
You can protect
just going to model
right.
the life that is counter to what they're being presented with. And at the end of the day, you can't control that. Like you cannot, you have to just trust, you know, whatever's going to happen is going to happen with them. But I don't think that's a good example because of all of these other things, like of things in Hollywood, things in music. Education is I think the biggest one. And that's not a factor. It's apples and oranges with what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well,
at least what I'm talking about.
My point was that propaganda and influence are sometimes the same thing. And that when your kids grow up, you can only hold this influence over them for so long and be such a good example for so long until they're 18 and they want to move out. And, you know, like do the Mennonites do, they spend a year in regular society and decide if they want to come back or not. Eventually you have to build this sustainable society, and sustainable not meaning of energy, obviously, but in meaning of lifestyle and worldview. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying it wouldn't work, because the nice part is, like you just said, the left tends to piss everyone off, or the right now, or, you know, you don't even use the right, but, you know, that sustainable society, that liberty loving society is probably going to last longer if people are going to be happier. You know, more people are going to turn to it than away from it. But I do think there is that you know, propaganda influence that is going to come in, and it's not just you defending yourself against propaganda, but being able to defend the next several generations, which is much more difficult.
Sure.
But, like I said, possible.
But I think, I mean, truth helps. Giving kids, I mean, if what you're talking about is kids, it's always going to be a crapshoot. But to your point,
to all you parents out there,
yeah, but propaganda and influence are the same thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe, but only when it works, right? So like, for example, I see a CNN piece, I think I even posted it, like about how it's Donald Trump's fault that Putin invaded Ukraine or something like that. Like that's pure propaganda. And it's just completely crazy. But does that constitute influence? Like, no, I kind of look at that and I'm like, that's crazy. Like, that's so stupid. And I laugh at it. Right. And so like, once you can identify, and the good thing about a lot of this stuff is that once you see it, you cannot see it. And so like, you know, I just don't think it's very easy to take the blue pill and go back into the matrix once you're out of that. And if you raise your kids properly, the probability that they're going to go like full, like eternal Rumspringa on you and just like do the opposite, I think is small. It's not saying it doesn't happen, but
yeah.
I think it's,
I don't know if I'd say it's small. I would say it's there, but I don't know.
Sure.
Again, if you build a better life and you show them that this life you're going to be happier this life, they're going to be more fulfilled during this life, then most of the time, yes, I would say that they would turn toward your worldview. But the unfortunate side effect of being young and idealistic is you're more attracted to these radical ideas. This is why socialism is still talked about today, which is completely insane if you know anything about its history. Which, you know, obviously he goes through the book here, but I think we're at one more, but I think just to switch subjects real fast, the chapter that I would probably point out in this book that was influential in I don't know if it's a strange way, but it's kind of the first time we decided to review the book in this way was Why the Worst Get on Top chapter, and how kind of eye-opening that was. And we talked about it before we came on the call, is everything's compared to Nazism, where Nazism is actually a really poor analog, that you know, Hitler does not come around very often. It's more of the people who are very, you know, well-meaning, who want to actually change the world for the better, that builds this very powerful organization that end up, you know, bolstering it and making sure it can do these good things very efficiently, very effectively. And then bad people see this power that they could easily just, you know, either stab the good people in the back, or, you know, convince the good people to have them get power so they can do whatever these good deeds more effectively. And that's how the worst get on top. And our end conclusion there was Why do the worst get on top? I went from thinking, why do the worst get on top? Why do the worst always end up being there, to being like, why would it end any other way? When you create this extremely powerful organism, why wouldn't the worst take control of it? And that's just something we see today. And when we talked about it a couple of days ago and talked about, just how poorly this Nazism analog is, because everyone thinks that Donald Trump is going to be a Hitler and that's how it all starts. It's like, that's not how this starts. Even if you thought Donald Trump is that way, it's very rarely how these, horrible, evil, powerful regimes take power. It is these well-intentioned, a lot of times by the experts, right? Really well-intentioned people that end up creating this powerful thing that does good for a little bit. And then it's utilized by people, who want to utilize it for bad things. And, unfortunately, the people who are there who could take that power and utilize it for good things just say, no, let's just get rid of this power and let's take a pause on it for a little bit. And I think that chapter is, I think, one of the more influential ones in the whole book.
It is. And because what Hayek is talking about is processes, right? And systems, and just kind of the way these things evolve their own self-interests, more than people specifically. Now, they're obviously like malevolent actors operating today, people that are very dishonest, that have become just completely corrupted by power and this ideology, and they believe a lot of the lies that they're telling, or at least they make themselves believe those lies. But in general, yeah, it's about this system and these processes. So let me ask you a question about the worst getting on top, and about how he's describing what happens whenever you create these kinds of processes. Okay, I'm going to start getting redundant, so you get my point. But my question for you is, and I think this is something that kind of gets into one of the more important questions, just even of this conversation and of the book, is of Hayek's legacy, and the legacy of what he said here in this book, and of the warnings and everything. And there's this stupid movie that came out whenever I was in high school called The Faculty. Have you ever seen that movie, The Faculty?
I don't think so.
It's on HBO Max, but the aliens in the high school. It's got like Elijah Wood and Josh Hartnett. And anyway, it's a solid sci-fi. It's actually a really good sci-fi movie. And there's this scene. It's like these aliens are taking over people, right? It's a little parasite thing. Mm-hmm. And there's a group of kind of survivors gathered at the end, and one of them is kind of like the sci-fi expert. And people ask her, they're like, "What happens at the end of Body Snatchers?" Because she keeps referencing Invasion of the Body Snatchers, mm-hmm. And she says, "They win, we lose." That's how it ends. And one of the other people who you thought was like a survivor as a person goes, "Do we really win? Do you think we'll win?" And then it's revealed that, she was like the queen of all of these aliens. And for some reason, I think about that with, I don't know why. I mean, when we were talking before we started, it's just like movies. It's just kind of like my lens for everything. But to me, it very much seems like the ideology that Hayek is warning about here, not one for one. It's evolved, it's adapted, it's gotten stronger and smarter in a lot of ways. It's also gotten weaker in some ways too, that I think it'd be interesting to talk about. But as it stands, to me, it seems like it's safe to say that this has won, or at the very least is very much winning. And that if you were to compare like the influence of people who thought like the planners in Hayek's day compared to Hayek's day to now, I mean, it's just like, it's not even close in terms of our progression towards authoritarianism. And one of the reasons why I think we don't identify it is we look for dictatorships. We do not look for oligarchies. And we are very much governed by oligarchy, not dictatorships. Now, I think that's one of the ways that this has gotten weaker. A dictatorship is stronger because it actually has plans, whereas this thing doesn't have plans. It just has processes that just kind of create these results without anyone actually planning. They don't have meetings on Thursdays. And so but I guess my question to you is, Well, here's how I'll sum it up. I saw James Lindsay shared a meme of, I think it was Ron Paul, and it was like, I took a screenshot of it for this conversation, so because I wanted to get your thoughts on it. And so there's just a picture of Ron Paul sitting there. It says, "Be me, be born in 1935. Watch the U.S. go into 7 wars. Watch the U.S. debt increase 29.9 trillion. Watch the U.S. dollar lose 95% of its value. Try to warn everyone. Try to warn everyone again. Try to warn everyone a third time. Get shunned by the media. Nobody listens. Keep talking anyway." And that's not wrong, but there's a thing, and I mentioned this the other day whenever we were talking, that it feels very much like conservatives or dissidents, or whatever you want to call it, fall into the trap, the same trap that progressives fall into, where they go, it'll work this time, right? They look at communism, they look at socialism, they look at collectivism, and they go, it'll work this time. We'll be the ones who get it right. And there's a certain slice of people who go against the regime, who try to put a spotlight on what it does. Tocqueville was saying this stuff. You can go all the way back to the French Revolution, Voltaire talking about this stuff. Collectivism versus individualism, and what power does. Then you get Tocqueville, and then Hayek is referencing Tocqueville, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get like Milton Friedman and the Thomas Sowells. Hayek was a student of Mises. And it feels very much like we kind of are doing the same thing. Like we go, look, oh yeah, Hayek said all this stuff. It's so insightful. It's so good. Look at that. Yeah, exactly. He said all this 70 years ago, and no one listened, and no one cares, and it's only gotten worse. Just like that thing with Ron Paul, like nobody listens, keep talking anyway. Mm. What I'm not saying is it's pointless to talk about this stuff. It's pointless to shine a spotlight on it. What I am saying is it does not seem like a good strategy for actually fighting it and changing it. It seems to me that one of the basic patterns of history is that there will always be, at least recent history. Why has Google been doing this lately with my phone? It's scaring the shit out of me. I'm gonna buy a flip phone. It's just like turns my mic on. Look, it just turned it on again.
Mine does that constantly.
Mine just started doing it, and I'm like, oh, good. This is why I don't have an Alexa. It's fucking spyware.
Anyway. I have a good scary story about that I can share after this.
Yeah. So, I do want to hear that. So, but my point is that there seems to be this like pattern of history of there's always going to be a few people who kind of get it, who get what's going on. They'll write some really good works that will endure for later generations to find and be influenced by. And then people from that generation will do that. And it just does nothing. It's the parable of the sower in Matthew, where Jesus talks about the sower sowing the seeds, and like it's just the seeds falling on the hard rock. Like it doesn't really take root or grow anything. There's just always going to be this group, and it's almost like the Matrix, where there's always going to be Zion, and a few people that break out of it, but robots are always going to be in charge, And so does it, am I being too cynical, or does it feel like to just talk about it and shine a spotlight on this, like it's not a strategy for beating it, it's a strategy for exposing it, I guess. But that's only as, we talked about that with like Hunter Biden's laptop and stuff. It's like, okay, they've been exposed.
Quite literally. Yeah.
Nothing. God. And what happened? Nothing, right? Nothing. And so like that to me feels like, unfortunately, I didn't like reaching this conclusion, but it feels like one of the legacies of Hayek, in the same way it feels like a legacy of Mises or Rothbard or Tocqueville or whoever, that they win, that this ideology wins, and the best you can do is get out of the way. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, well, other than, all societies fall, no matter how perfect they are, they will fall eventually to something. And maybe this is just the sickness that keeps consuming it, or at least, in our modern times keeps consuming it. The other question is like, how far would we be without these people? How far would we have already been? What would today look like without people like F.A. Hayek? Would we just be down the road a lot further? Or, society would have fallen and another one would have grown out of it already. Like, we don't know where we would be without these people, at least slowing it down. So the best we can say is maybe they slowed it down.
Do you even think that? Do you think Hayek slowed it down? If so, how?
Hayek by himself, maybe not, but I think these people, Thomas Sowell, Hayek, Mises, and even, Ron Paul may have slowed it down to a degree, but the problem is you don't know how much it's slowed down because they're a heavy influence on a lot of people. So I do think it's at minimum slowed it down because we don't know where it'd be today if no one was really fighting against it. But I think, in terms of Ron Paul, he's fighting in their game. He's going after the thing that they want. So he's playing their game. And he also is kind of, you got to dive into, his actual beliefs and promises in office, which is mostly the libertarian of I will come into office and I will do nothing, which is just not appealing to most people. But also, he's playing on the Republican side of the aisle out of necessity, basically. And that's not a side of the aisle that is, let's say, always open to this type of small government, limited powers idea, even though they advertise like they are. As we've seen with the presidencies of George Bush and his dad, that's not exactly, their game plan either.
Right.
They at least, what you can say, at least about George W. Bush, you can say that he tried to use power to do good with it, but he didn't try to stop the growing of power. Like he wanted it to grow as well. And the big problem with that is again, the next guy can take that larger power and do worse things with it. So it's a bit of finding the best strategy to actually implement the ideas and the knowledge they're talking about, which is, helping the everyday person. Running for office isn't going to help, but helping the everyday person is going to at least help a little bit more. That's the best way to, I guess, defend yourself against this ideology, because there's a lot of people who hold the views that we do and are knowledgeable as we are, that do push back against this thing in their own way. And it doesn't mean it's going to get stopped, but it at least slows it down. Now, how do you actually reverse course and stop going down the road to serfdom and go back to the road to liberty? It might be making yourself anti-fragile and just finding yourself not in the rubble. Because when you say this ideology wins, does it? I mean, it wins. It wins in the way that it destroys itself, and it destroys the society that it takes control over. I don't think it wins in the way that it takes over and socialism is successful. That never, ironically, has never happened.
So yes and no.
Yeah.
So whenever I say it wins, let's try to assign some like specifics here, because this is very much goes into a question that Chrono asked about how do these decentralized things protect themselves from that, and that's the unipolar order versus multipolar order kind of thing. And it really is kind of like the question. So whenever I say it wins, I mean, it's safe to say that this ideology and like elites holding it, buying into it, or at least expressing it, like I think I saw yesterday that Bill Gates just bought like this huge home, why did the rich people keep buying these huge mansions on, seafront property that they also will say is going to be underwater in 5 minutes, because of climate change, like, right. So, what they do and what they express are two different things. But my point is, will there always be elites who express this ideology? Yeah, I don't see a world where that doesn't happen. And so whenever I say this wins, I mean, we were talking about this the other day of like, this is sustainable to the degree of like, we could get a lot worse in the US. We could become basically Venezuela or some third world country, right? And do the elites in those countries live pretty well? Yeah, they do. They certainly do. And do the regular people have pretty bad lives? Yeah, they do. And so I think when I say it wins, I mean, it will endure, and there will always be people that hold it, and that will express it and use it to justify, their own acquisition and power and just whatever. It's just, I mean, it's just religious stuff. Like there are crazy religious cults. Like how many religious cults like don't exist anymore? Right? Like there's always going to be a few people who like buy into this. Unfortunately, this is just a mind virus that the elite mind is they have a very weak immune system to it, like really weak immune system.
Well, I don't think it's the elite are predisposed to it as much as if you
Absolutely.
take collectivism, let me just finish what I'm going to say. If you broaden out collectivism to its base principles, it's we can do more together. That's like the most basic bumper sticker slogan you can possibly have. We can do more together. We can accomplish what we want more together. And if we can't do that via free exchange, or we can't do that voluntarily, we will force you to do that. And then that slowly goes down the road of, I think if I just had the power, if I had the ring for one minute, I could change so much about this world and make it awesome for everyone.
We can do more together with the right leaders.
Yeah.
With the right leadership. Communism is just a scheme to switch the ruling class. That's all it is. It's just to put different people in power. That's it. Yeah. And make the lives of regular people worse. Like that. That's all it does. But I'm just saying that's what I would add to your definition.
Yeah. But when it comes to the powerful being predisposed to it, I think it's just either the people who are powerful are the only ones that can take that position at the time, or, some people ride it to power. They'll go from nothing to beating the collectivist drum until they find themselves just in a massive, powerful organization, or they do what the worst, get on top. A good-willed person goes in, creates all this power to do good, and then someone bad stabs in the back and takes over the power. So my point is not necessarily just a mechanism inside the powerful. It is something I think we all kind of hold in our hearts, and we all are like, man, if I could just have the power, you could do it inside your company you work for and say, man, this company really could improve. If I was just made the CEO of this company for one day, I would improve it and it would become so much better and everyone would love it. It's that same principle I think all of us kind of have naturally within us, because we all think we can do better, if we were the ones put in power. And so, yeah, my whole point is it's not necessarily just something the elite have. It's just something the elite have more access to, I guess.
They can do more with it.
Yeah.
Right. Than Joe down the street. That's fair. I don't know, but my point is that let's just use Occam's razor and like, look at what we see. What we see is they are the ones like this is an intelligentsia thing, right? Like this is what Hayek was writing about. This is what we can see even in like Nazi Germany. Like who helped get Hitler elected? Because he was elected. The intelligentsia did. Like this is an intellectuals thing.
It might be
intellectuals and race, how 30, 40 years ago, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's because, and maybe this is a valid point then with the intellectuals. The unique thing about intellectuals is they work outside of reality. They work in theory. So it's easy for them to make these changes quickly. And sometimes the elites do the same thing. Like how much does Jeff Bezos live in reality? And it's not even his fault. It's just a natural occurrence of what he is. No one is as rich as that guy, except for, kind of rotation at the top, but he's so mega rich. There's no possible way he can live in reality because it's not possible for him. So that's why he might think, Bill Gates thinks he can do all these wonderful things with his organization because he hasn't lived in reality for quite a long time. So maybe that's a proper function of why,
So here's my question. So like Chrono asked this, and I think this is the right question, because really what I'm getting at is the legacy of Hayek. In some ways, people who are really smart and really principled, shining a spotlight on this thing, and it just kind of, hey, what's up? Waving and keeping on going. Like, and change not actually happening, but it continuing to get worse. I mean, if you remember, I think they talked about they did like a re-release in the 70s, and he talked about how it had gotten worse because it just became these bureaucratic oligarchies in the US government. Like that's what, like it wasn't planning, it wasn't central planning, it was bureaucracies taking control. And so it kind of evolved and morphed. But the question Chrono asked is like, okay, so then what do a bunch of individuals, a collective of individuals do to protect themselves from this thing. And what seems to be the case to me is if you can stay out of their purview, do it. But if not, then you have to have power. Power is the only thing that restrains power. Hayek even talks about this at the end of the book, whenever he's talking about like an international order. And he draws some conclusions that I think are kind of silly and self-defeating. But even there, he acknowledges that only power can constrain power. And what we see is what a lot of conservatives do is they will build a platform based on issues of like, we disagree with this thing. We disagree with this one particular issue. And the problem with issues is that that's not a goal. Like all they're trying to do is influence power rather than to obtain it in order to just change the thing. And so like anytime you're in a situation where you're just hoping that power does what you want, I would say more often than not, you're going to be disappointed with how that goes. And so again, you either remove yourself from its influence as much as possible. Now there are consequences. Like this is where I say like, you can do that, but sometimes you might, what if the power, goes to war or brings war to our front door, or something like that, like, or they get the wrong people on the Supreme Court and then all of a sudden they find it totally constitutional to get rid of the federalist system altogether and implement like a federalized police force, and, maybe actually freedom of speech is a bad idea and we can get rid of that. Like, so there are consequences, but those are like D-Day, like this is like 10 out of 10 level bad, and therefore I think improbable. Now that doesn't mean you want to like discount it altogether, but I think you can remove yourself from the influence of like the day-to-day minutia of this stuff. Or again, you take power. So here would be an example. I'll give a practical example. One of the reasons why I went from being really, 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 really nervous and scared and upset about Joe Biden being elected, to like now, like not be, of course, I'm not thrilled about it, but to at least not feeling as threatened by it, is because kind of like one of the things I said earlier about how like one of the ways in which this ideology is weak in the United States is there's not like one person creating plans. There's not like one person at the top going, okay, we got to do this, 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 and this to take out our opposition. And once we do that, then we can consolidate more power. It's not happening. It's just these organic processes just kind of like playing out how they play out because of like the ideas that get favored in these systems. And so because of that, they're actually really kind of bad at being authoritarian in some ways. And we still have, if you were to just strip everything down, strip away all the noise, strip away all the hot takes, strip away all of the, conservative fear mongering or progressive fear mongering, our federalist system is actually still kind of working. Biden issues these vaccine mandate stuff. And I even did a video about it afterwards where I was freaking out about it, man. I was like, this is it. It's here. Oh my God. Right. And I overreacted because what I didn't realize at the time or think about was, for the time being, we have our federalist system that can check the exertion of power from states against the federal government. It still works. It still worked. And so I think like the most practical thing you can do is you move to a state that is a red state. I mean, that's just like just move to like Montana or Texas or Florida or whatever, like something like that. Like if it has a climate that, go to like South Dakota or something, like whatever. That is like, because that is the, well, I'll say right now, like that is like the best, most practical example of individualists who are able to say no to like the authoritarians, at least in our government, on a practical level. Because the reason why I say they're not good authoritarians is because they're not trying to get rid of federalism. They like it's still working. Now they
I think
might, and this
through,
is,
yeah, I think you mentioned
I'm
a
not
couple
saying
easy steps, but yeah, there's
totally.
some
I'm
quick
not
steps you can
saying
do
that it
that.
is like that I can't picture that happening. I
Yeah.
absolutely can picture that
Like getting rid of the
happening.
electoral college is something they've
Totally.
definitely gone after
Yeah.
before, which is
Right.
unfortunate.
Right. They want to do it. They are beta testing a lot of these ideas. Okay. Like that's, I'm not saying that they are not, but because it's just like this kind of loose conglomerate of people that kind of think the same way, and no one's going, hey, we're going to do this here. You go over there and you go do that. They're just really ineffective at it. They're effective at it in their own circles. So let's take like Chicago. You think Chicago's ever going to elect a Republican mayor or something like that? Like, no, of course not. Like they're good at consolidating their power and maintaining their power and keeping other people out of power in some of these like little areas, right? Where it's just easier to do. But on a national level, they're just not super good at it. Now, can they rig an election? They can. They can do that. But the problem is that the president doesn't have a lot of power. The president is actually not super powerful. They do have some power. Like they don't have zero. It's more than one, right? And so like that doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, like they haven't removed the barriers to the maximum application of power because they're just not thinking that way. They're just kind of going on their ideology. And so my practical answer is I think move to a red state. And as long as like there are a few things, I've really reduced my list of things that I'm going to be like frightened about, or they're going to really make me go, oh boy, like that's, and one of the things on that list is whenever we see practical, tangible steps being taken to fundamentally change the federalist system in our country. That's one. Significant gun control moves is another. And so there's a few things like that, because it's basically, I would go, okay, anything that constitutes them trying to remove barriers of resistance to absolute power, those are the things that are red flags for me. Other than that, I really don't think there's a lot to worry about if you're in a red state and you're not working for the federal government.
So Corona does bring up some interesting questions. One, at any scale of relevance, you certainly will be in their purview, I believe. I don't totally agree with that. I think so. When you bring up, like I've said earlier, when you bring up something like the Amish, I actually think it's their scale that insulates them much more than their beliefs. I think their scale is so small that they're not consequential at all for the left, and that's why they ignore them. But when he talks about building basically an antidote to the poisons that they have, because they are going into the same states you're saying, they're also sending some people there, although it's not really progressive. So take the example of Texas. Unfortunately, I believe Texas is going to turn probably purple in the next I would say 8 to 12 years. I think they are slowly moving its way to blue. Unfortunately, the fact that Beto O'Rourke,
the Latinos are moving red. The Latinos are getting redder, and the young people are getting bluer. So I don't know. But when it comes to, they might even out.
I mean, hopefully, because that would suck to lose Texas. But I think when you understand the migration, people are not really leaving California because it's too liberal, unless they're already a conservative, then they're leaving it, which doesn't really change that paradigm much. It's actually the companies that are moving out of California that bring their staff, their woke staff, or just bring a new generation of woke staff in a red state that turns those states purple. So as an antidote to having, how would you say you could insulate yourself when moving to a red state? Like, say you move to Texas from California. How can you make sure that Texas just doesn't turn into a new California? You got to move in the next, 8 years. Like what's a good antidote? Because obviously there's the voting with your feet. What is a good antidote to moving from California to Texas, just to have Texas turn purple or blue in 8 years and have to move again? Is there an antidote to insulate yourself from that locality that you're talking about from turning to more progressive and you just having to vote?
Leftists are not moving to red areas. That is not a thing that's happening. Progressives are not moving to red areas. Progressives are moving to progressive areas as the people who can't take it anymore are leaving the progressive areas. What's happening is that young people are every single year, a new contingent of voters is unleashed onto the population that has radical progressive views.
Mm.
They are not moving to the red areas to turn it blue. They are harvesting and cultivating their own crop, or cultivating and harvesting their own crop of constituents in those areas via the fact that every year kids turn 18 and can vote. And so they're getting,
well, like I said, it's not the progressives leaving California. It's the progressive companies that leave California, go to Texas, that create that woke generation, because then they get jobs there and they instill their woke BS teachings.
The schools are way more influential than those companies, I think. And so, so I like, because I mean, that's very similar to what the question Chrono's asking, right? So he says, I agree with you. I don't think you'll always be in their purview. Like, I guess it's the same way that, if I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see an ant, do I see the ant? Yes. Do I give a shit about the ant? No. Like, I think you want to become like the ant to them. Like, our progressives, goes back to the Amish analogy. Are they aware of the existence of the Amish? Yes. Are they aware that the Amish, do not hold their values in any even slightest way? Yes. Can you find one clip of progressives talking about how we have to take out the Amish? Like, no, right? Like, they're aware of them, but they're not a threat. Like, so, I mean, if they're aware of you, but they don't care about you, like, that's like the best place you can be, right? And so, unless you are actually in power yourself. But anyway, so, how do you keep them from moving and trying to poison the well? I don't think you do. I think the counter poison is just truth, and you build up systems that are just like, no. So like, and that's where it gets to that parallel economy type thing that we were talking about earlier, right? So what was the company? Was it Coinbase or whatever that said, actually, we're not going to do this anymore? No, it wasn't Coinbase. There was a outfitting company. They made like outdoor stuff. I can't remember who it was. And they said, actually, we're not going to do any of this political stuff anymore. We're not going to do this diversity, all this other stuff. And they didn't, and they lost like maybe 25% of their employees. But it was a sifting, like it was a culling of the wheat from the chaff, right? Like they left, and so now their company's stronger as a result of it. And so, like, the counter poison is reality and courage. I think in a lot of ways, because I mean, this thing operates, the places where it wields power and influence, it does so largely on the basis of the perception of like consensus. And so, like, the more you saturate an area with people that are going to call bullshit on it, like, the less power it has to achieve that like kind of sense of consensus, and the more kind of homogeneity you can create in terms of like culture and values to kind of keep, homeschooling is rapidly increasing, right? Across the country. My church is building a new building, just because we need a new building. The congregation's gotten big enough that we have to. And one of the new additions to the plans is to have this space for a homeschool co-op, not like a church school, but just a homeschool co-op, because people, the interest has increased so much, and we're seeing this all over the place. And so, like, I think the counter poison is just, again, being competent and operating in reality and living out the values that are just superior, while at the same time being in an area, whatever the domain is, whether it's your business or the government around you, that is going to like mirror that, or at least protect that. I don't have a lot of faith in conservatives generally, across the board whenever it comes to governance. But the best I can say is that, like, okay, let's take the opposite of Chicago. If you have a red state that is going to be probably safely be a red state, then that is, we were talking about like whenever conservatives get in power, they press pause on stuff. Well, you got a lot of places where the pause button's been hit for decades. I live in Wyoming. Wyoming is a red state. Like, it's been very different here, for the pandemic than it is even in like my home state of Missouri. And so, I think that's the most practical thing you can do. I think that's a much better strategy than like trying to change California and stuff. And like, and do I know what's going to happen whenever, like they're interested in one of the things. Last thing I'll say. One of the things I said, especially like after the election, is this is all ultimately going to boil down to a big federal thing for, trying to exert some pressure on states, and the states saying no, like this big power thing, trying to exert pressure and sovereignty and its will in an undesirable way on places outside of it that disagree with it. And it's like, and then those places saying no, and then it's going to be like, what happens when they say no? Like, I don't know the answer to that. I don't even know what that issue is going to be, but I can tell you that the most recent example was the mandate stuff, and they said no, and it didn't work in the red places. And in the blue places, they're going to implement it, and it kind of just becomes the norm, and the threat's always there. And so the blue places are going to get bluer, but the red places are going to get redder as well. I don't know how that's going to play out ultimately, but I think in the interim, like, we're not going to see the conclusion of that in our lifetime, probably. Yeah. And so,
I mean, I'm to live to 150, so I don't know about you, but
I don't so even if you live that long, I don't think you'll see
the axiom is one beer a day keeps the doctor away, but
that's true.
I think when it comes to that, it'll be an interesting switch that we see, because what I brought up before, when it's the woke companies that are moving, not the people who are moving. I'm pretty sure there was a study that looked at that in Texas, and it was shown that it was definitely woke companies that were changing. Of course, it's going to be public schools, but those companies are making a huge difference. And that's where building that parallel economy is going to be interesting, because you either build companies to compete with them, or these companies keep moving to redder areas, and either they have to generate that woke staff by just you look at Disney being kind of taking not a conservative stance, but at least a non-political stance for a short while, until a few crazy radicals within the company forced the CEO to change. I don't know how well that extortion game really works when you see red states turn redder and blue states turn bluer, when it's obviously much more advantageous business wise for any company to work in a red state than it is a blue state. It'll be interesting how those companies react, if they're actually going to start to be beholden to the people they sell their product to, and who actually give them, a place to thrive. Are they going to change? Do we need to build that parallel economy to them, or is it going to be like they go woke and it's like, all right, we're going to build Disney right across from Disney and have it compete and it just mop the floor with them. So
that's where the parallel economy thing comes in, because it only takes like one really like effective chief diversity officer to completely ruin that company, right? Even if it's in that state. So like, that's where having the parallel economy, or the parallel I like the word parallel institutions better. The parallel institutions within those other areas, that's why that's so important. Yeah. Because you don't want them to have it, because they will do it. If they can't do it from the top down, they will do it from the ground up. And so like, that's why you build those other companies to do that. I mean, I saw just yesterday, I didn't know anything about this. I haven't done any stuff Daily Wire, but I guess Jeremy Boring started a razor company or something.
Jeremy's Razors.
Yeah. And I watched the ad for it. It's hilarious. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. I hope this works. Right. You can ask the question, does Harry's Razors, like, does them wanting to kowtow to, the left, it affects a razor company differently than it affects Hollywood, right? Like, go woke, go broke is not a thing you see a lot with like shoes, right? So it's more of an ideology thing than a product quality thing, at least as of right now, for a lot of these things. But having those alternatives matters. Having the alternatives matters.
How far do you think the parallel institution thing can go? Because now we're starting to get into kind of the Curtis Yarvin idea of creating like a parallel EPA, which the way that the EPA should be, it should be the EPA of Wyoming, and it should be one guy with a test tube, and that's as much as it should be. So if you create those local parallels, the EPA of Wisconsin, the EPA of Wyoming, the EPA of Missouri, and start to break down the bureaucracy that way to localize it a bit more and limit their powers the way they're originally supposed to be. Granted, that's going to be a revolving process. Every single
totally.
3 to 4 letter the bureaucracy you create is eventually going to grow and become too powerful, and
power is always preserved.
process. Yeah, but do you think that'll be an effective? I don't even know if it's possible under the system, because I'm sure the main bureaucracy, you can't just create EPA2 and then find a way to fund that when it's made up of one guy and limited powers. It's hard to make that switch, but I'm wondering if it could be done at more of a local level. Like I said, that the EPA of Wyoming could exist and now supersede the EPA, the federal system.
Well,
because that's the volcano. That's the closest thing to a volcano you can get.
Well, it's not a volcano because it's not destroying power. It's just changed the name. Like creating another EPA is not an answer. Like that's not.
I
think you say no. I think what you're actually saying is like, or I think a more refined version is like, what would it look like for states to start just saying no to the power of these other things? They don't have to create their own alternatives. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they don't have necessarily like. So let's use something different. Let's use like the FAA. Do you think we're going to get rid of freaking air traffic control? Like if they stop saying, you know what I mean? Like, of course not. They're still going to have air traffic controllers and air traffic controller towers, even if the FAA doesn't exist. And so like, but they could still do that and say, yeah, we're doing that here. And you want us to do this policy? No. I think the more likely version is that what you see and what we see even today is bureaucracy is at the top, create whatever new dumbass policy is. It's largely ignored by people at the bottom in their own places. Like, so, I'm now working at the post office. I hate this job. I really do hate it a lot. But like one of the things that the postmaster does is a thing that's called a stand-up talk in the mornings. And it's a prepackaged spiel that he gets from the HQ and wherever the headquarters of, I think, Washington, right? And a lot of times it's about COVID and the importance of wearing a mask and all this other stuff. No one in that room's wearing a mask, including the postmaster where I live, right? And so it's like, it just gets ignored and it's unofficial. But the problem is that it remains, it still exists and lingers as a thing that could be used as a potential cudgel if it becomes convenient, right? And so the other side of that is, I got a bacterial infection for my daughter because she's almost 3, and those kids are always, she got it from some dirty ginger friend of hers. And I had a doctor, literally, when I went to the doctor, tell me, you can take your mask off. That's not contagious for me, unless we start like making out and I'm like drinking your snot or something. And like not going to happen. Right. And so, but then I go into work and they're like, you have to wear a mask for 5 days. Okay. 5 days starting when? What do you mean? Okay. 5 days from when I first got medicine, 5 days from when I was first diagnosed, 5 days from my first symptoms, 5 days from now. Like, what do you mean? 5 days from now. So just 5 days from now. Like I've been on antibiotics. I have a 7-day run of antibiotics. Today is day 4. I was already
Fauci rule, making up science on the fly there.
Right, exactly. And they're like, yeah, you still got to wear it. And I'm like, okay. So like, but only inside. Like, don't worry about it. Just once you're outside or in vehicles, like, no, I absolutely will not be doing it there. And I hate that I'm doing it here. And when you're not looking, I'm going to be taking it off. And so, and I did. But my point is that there's a problem of like, as long as the stuff always kind of exists as a thing that can be used, like when convenient, that's a pretty big problem. So it's much better to just have a thing that just says no. I don't think you're going to create parallels to the EPA. I don't think that would be smart because it's just, you just move the problem. Like you said, it becomes cyclical. Like this is a thing that happens in bureaucracies. So you probably just don't want to create another bureaucracy. Generally, I think it's
but you do have that momentary period of not being threatened by the EPA. If you can say no for long enough, and then there's only so much you can say no to before there's going to be action taken by either other states, which is fine. Like if California says our companies cannot do work with Wyoming because they created their own EPA or said no to the EPA, I think that is the inevitable world we're heading at. And hopefully the companies that work in California will be like, well, we pay 95% taxes maybe, and we can't sell to a whole state. And, once Wyoming, it goes to Texas, then we're really getting screwed over. So
here's an example. States legalizing weed, right? Like it is marijuana is federally illegal.
Yeah.
And states said, no, we are going to say it is legal in our state. So actually, as a result, the post office can't ship marijuana or anything like that, even if it's from a company that makes it legally, to another resident in their state who has purchased it legally. They can't do that because it's federally illegal. But my point is that we don't have zero precedent for what happens, what it looks like for states to say, no, we're gonna do this thing instead of and actually that is definitionally the marijuana example is them saying no to the exertion of authority. Here's another one. Sanctuary cities and sanctuary, areas in states who do not cooperate with immigration. They openly do not cooperate with the federal immigration service. Like they don't. And so like they will warn people about raids and stuff. So this does exist. This does happen. Like it's just not it's just really kind of domain specific in some of these areas.
I just think it depends on the I guess palette that the rest of America has toward it. Like the weed example is just like people don't give a shit anymore, so no one cares. And also, if either party were really to really hammer down and making sure weed's illegal like everywhere, they would both be opposed greatly by I think people within both of their parties. So I think it's a bit different. The immigration one's definitely much more interesting because that's something that a lot of people are against. There's not a lot of tolerance for that, yet it still happens in super aggressive areas. So I think that's actually a really good analog for this particular one.
Yeah, so you can just extrapolate that same thing across the board.
Yeah.
Like what happened whenever, like ultimately the juice is not worth the squeeze, at least right now. And this is where I say they're not very effective authoritarians. But the problem is that we don't have very effective dissidents. So like, I ultimately think that if you had a state that just said that had a governor that was just like balls out, I will not like have like a Ron Paul type governor, something like that, who was just like, come at me, bro. Like, we're not going to do that. No. I really think they could get away with it. I think there are very few things they could not get away with because it's just not worth it. And again, I give the example on a micro level, the sovereign citizens living in Wyoming that don't pay taxes, they will shoot at any county sheriff that shows up to their house. They don't care. You know what? The sheriffs leave them alone because they're like, this is not worth getting shot over. I'm not, they're out there doing their own thing. They've got their cattle, whatever. Are they breaking the law? Yeah, I can think of like 18 off the top of my head that they're breaking. But you know what? I don't want to get shot. And so as long as they're not like, I'm not getting phone calls every day about something that they're doing to their neighbors, or something like that. Like, I'm going to leave them alone because it's just not worth it. I really think that ultimately there are states that could operate like that. I really do.
Yeah.
There's a reason why I go back to this in nearly every dystopian or like future, like, novel, movie, TV show, whatever, that the person who wrote that, the way they conceptualized the future is of enormous areas of like mega unified control, like huge metropolitan areas, like sprawling like crazy, like super cities, like in Judge Dredd or something like that. And little podunk outposts where it's like the Wild West again, and people are just kind of doing their own thing outside of the influence of that power, like across the board. Anytime you have like a really big futuristic thing, that's how they visualize the world. And I think the reason is because it's intuitively true that that power will continue to consolidate, but it will reach a point where if there's a thing that's not there, we can use the micro again, the Amish here. If the Amish just like didn't pay taxes or whatever, like I think there's a lot of they could just get away with it. It's the same way these sovereign citizens do, because you're not a threat to my power and you're not worth my time. It's gonna look worse for me to come and start messing with you than it is for you because you're just doing your own thing. And so as long as it's not a threat to them, I think that will continue to be the case.
All right. We've been doing this for over 2 hours. I don't think we've mentioned F.A. Hayek in the last like 40 minutes. But
Well, but we're
probably
talking
should
about the
include it.
legacy. We're talking about the
Sure.
legacy of his. So here's the question: Is what it? You tell me. What is F.A. Hayek's legacy?
Well, I think his legacy is going to end up being a lot like, he's going to be an historian of the past, which is, I mean, at least that's what he is now. It's going to be showing how, you know, this stuff comes back every couple generations, and even though they change the language, they change some of the methods and what they're doing. It's kind of here to stay. It's a disease that will keep coming. It's an infection that will keep, once you get rid of it, it will slowly come back and start to grow. And I think his was a lot of a warning from a dying Europe over to, again, where it was received very, very successfully in America. And, I think it's a warning to be heeded, much more than, just completely ignored or saying, well, this democratic socialism is different from planning, or democratic planning is what they even refer to it several times. It's like, no, you got to identify the language change in there. But hopefully the legacy will end up being more than just an historian and more of a teacher, as to either find ways to fight against it, which I think, exiting the fight, depending on the situation, isn't the greatest strategy right now. I don't think all is lost yet, but like you said, kind of preparing for a loss and getting away from the crumbling infrastructure that is here, I think is a valuable lesson as well. Just kind of know your limits.
Yeah, I think it'd be very easy to draw the conclusion that I am just like so completely cynical that I think none of this matters or anything like that, especially based on this conversation. That's not the case. And I think a lot of it boils down to what you just said. Like, you kind of need to know your limits. You need to know what battles are worth it and which ones aren't. And one of the things that I see in Hayek's legacy is, and I think it's not just Hayek. I think Soul does this incredibly well. James Burnham does this. Like, if someone wants to know, in order to know what to do, you got to know where you are. And I think that they help shine a light on, and just like telling people where they are. And, and Hayek even said that most of his book was criticism. He doesn't give any proposals or anything like that. And one of my critiques of conservative kind of reactionaries is that, just because they are good at telling people what not to do, they're like, no, actually, this doesn't work. That's not the same as having like knowing the right answer of what to do. But that doesn't mean there's no utility there. And one of the things that I think Hayek does really well is for those who are of an open mind and who are actually interested in learning about this stuff, he helps make sure that the column, for socialism, collectivism, planning, however you want to put it, that ideology, that they look at that and go, that is not an option. That is not a viable option. That will lead to, serfdom. That will lead to ruin. And so now I know if anyone proposes anything in that category, the answer is no. And I know why the answer is no, not to do that. That's good. That's like, it's much better. I like, it's good to have actual like answers and stuff, but life is hard and complicated, and all this stuff's really complicated. And so, you're probably not going to find people that have like really good answers, about this, but being able to help people understand like what isn't an answer and what isn't going to work, and to remove that from their general schema and framework of proposals, like they can go, okay, anytime I hear politicians say this, no. Or anytime I hear someone say, well, maybe this, no. Oh, democratic socialism, no, that's okay. You might as well be saying turd sandwich, like that doesn't work. And so like, yeah, I think his legacy is one of informing people that if we're going to say like the there's a road to serfdom and there's a road to prosperity, or a road to, maybe not prosperity is the right word, but a road to
Liberty.
freedom. Yeah, liberty. I think Hayek very much serves as like a big sign, a big marquee sign pointing to an exit ramp off of the road to serfdom. And he might take you to a crossroads. He might take you, to an intersection where you don't really know which way to go after that. But what you do know is you can't get back on that highway. You cannot get back on that road. That road is that's dangerous. And, I think that's enough. That's more than most. And he is an influence on future, cartographers to help, people create a better map about which way we ought to go and what path we ought to choose, merely by virtue of eliminating the ones that are going to be ruinous for us. And for that, I'm thankful to him. I think this last thing I'll say, just anecdotally, whenever I finished the book the first time, I remember where I was on a roof of a house. I gave you a picture of the house. I got these big, beautiful tomato plants that I was very jealous of outside of the house whenever I finished listening to the book for the first time. And I was so floored by it. I called my dad, actually, and I completely forgot that my dad is my dad, and, thought Bernie Sanders is great. It's democratic socialism, but I wanted to talk to him about it. And, my dad gave me all the typical, socialism isn't communism and democratic socialism is different. And he did all that. But I remember just having this thought of I cannot believe I used to agree with that. And I could never, ever hold those views again. I could never.
How long ago was this?
It was the summer of 2017.
So this is post Bernie supporter. But would you say you've been red pilled already? Do you consider yourself red pilled?
I would say, yeah, I was red pilled long before that. I mean, to me, red pilling is just realizing that something's going on here, and it just spreads. You see, okay, this thing, oh, and it's also this thing, oh, and it's also this thing. But I was still very much asking a lot of questions. I don't know when I made my first video. I think I made my first video in 2018, but I was still very much trying to find common ground with the left and trying to reconcile progressive views, and taking the most charitable interpretation of them. But my point is that Hayek helped me realize just how completely untenable a lot of these ideas were that I had previously thought could maybe work under the right circumstances and stuff. And I would never get back on that road. I would never be able to occupy that space again of taking those things seriously. And I think that's in many ways, at least as I see it, is his legacy, is helping people realize that. And in a way that, I think maybe is not as forceful as I would like, but again, that's okay. He's British, so you got to cut him some slack. And it's one of those things, that I'll watch a Robert Redford movie sometimes and go, God, I wish he was young right now, because he's such a good actor. I would like to grow up with Robert Redford. I think they're actors people I grew up with, and you'd love to see, you don't just want to come in on the tail end of their stuff. And I wish Hayek, I wish he was around now. I would love to just hear his further analysis and insights into the nature of what this thing evolved into, to help people recognize this kind of bureaucratic monster now.
Would you say probably average once an episode? We'd say, what would he say now?
Yeah,
as
yeah,
we're reading
easily.
through his material is just
Totally.
I mean, he was spot on, but there's this little thing that's he did not pay attention to as much, right? He focused a lot on,
or it was just a different situation then, Yeah.
He did focus a lot on Germany at the time, but less so of even though he did focus on it, but less so the evils that we found in the Soviet Union. So I think,
there
are definitely some things that if you'd have saw, he would have either warned us more about, or Probably dropped the what did you say, chapter 15, the prospects of international order one, which again, I don't think it's something he was necessarily advocating for, but to me was something is like, all right, if you asked the question and we absolutely had to have one, this is how it should be done.
Yeah.
But yeah,
He had a much more naive version. I think he believed in a benign version of this stuff that I believe now he would say cannot exist. It's like there's not a benign version of it.
To quickly explain to the audience, I think he really was picturing some international order that operated like the United States as a federalist system that
Totally.
independent states with this overarching federal government and constitution that would make sure, we'd all follow the same basic rules. But if he would see what the United States is turning into now, which I don't think is a lost experiment quite yet, but it is beginning to, you're beginning to see the faults in it. And, hopefully we explain some of that stuff here today. And, I think Hayek, this is like one of those books that's like, this should be mandatory reading in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have some places doing like, what's his nuts from People's History guy. Howard Zinn.
Yes.
Yeah. If people are mandatorily saying you have to read that book, I think you should have to read this 5 times before you read that one, and then 5 times after, just to wash the taste out of your mouth.
There's actually a book called Debunking Howard Zinn.
I have it. Right.
I forgot what the name is.
I have Howard Zinn right there, and I have Debunking Howard Zinn by Graeber.
It's a female. The book I'm thinking of is a female author.
Like Graeber. I know. I can see your last name from here, but anything else? Anything else in the book? Final epic review?
Not really, man. I'm just thankful that, like, again, I know I probably sound like cynical and stuff, but I am thankful for Hayek. I am thankful for all of these people, because there's a reality that we didn't really touch on, but it takes courage to be a dissident. It takes courage to oppose the prevailing opinions of your time, especially whenever those opinions are attached to, like, moral superiority and stuff. And so I'm thankful for Hayek, not just because of the impact he had in my life, but I'm thankful for the example he set of being just courageous and, standing up for what he knew was right. And the reality is that we never know. Like, so, I mentioned, like, Voltaire and Tocqueville and Hayek and Mises and Rothbard and Milton Friedman and Sol and whatever through today, did they actually just do nothing? Well, I think you're right to say we don't know, but the odds that they did nothing is very small. And at the very least, what they did was set an example of, you can say no to this stuff. You can say no, and you can explain why no, because truth and reality are on your side. You might not win in this generation. You might not. This thing, I do think it's winning. I think this ideology is winning. I think it has more power now than it did yesterday, and it will have more power tomorrow than it did today. But you can still say no to it, and you can inspire others, and you never know what that's going to turn into. You just don't. Mm-hmm. There's a butterfly effect there that we don't know about. And so I'm thankful for Hayek, not just for his insights, but for his courage and willingness to stand up and speak those, despite it being not super popular. I mean, we know it wasn't popular. We know that he was ignored. We know it. There were people crapping all over him,
He wrote this before the end of the war too. So, talking trash about Germany as there's a prospect of them taking over your country is that does not lack courage there. And we definitely talked about that in the opening episode. And I think, when it talks, when you say this kind of courage deficit we have, it's, we're to the point where it's not that the kind of prevailing ideas that people are not courageous enough to say no to. It's actually a very small minority of people who are pushing these ideas that seem so scary to the majority of people. And I keep using this example of the transgenderism thing. It's like most people in America do not believe a man can become a woman just because he says he is. And then when you expand that out to the world, I mean, it's statistically 0 people believe that.
Oh, it's so few.
And it's, but the courage deficit is so out of whack that that very small minority can take over a whole country, that to the point where if you come out publicly and say that, you will be shamed or, you know, threatened by getting fired or, you know, your position taken away. So look at F.A. Hayek. The guy was much more courageous than most people today, again, with the looming Nazi occupation over his head. You know,
he was in London while they were bombing London every day during air raids.
It took we actually heard the bombing on the audiobook. It was so close.
Right.
But if that's one takeaway you can take from this book is the absolute balls that this guy had to write it. So
and you never know. All right. Let me just say before we wrap up, I've had a lot of fun doing this with you, man, and I I hope we can do it again with some other book. You know, I think it'd be fun, and I appreciate everyone who, you know, watched it and, you know, listened to what we had to say. You know, what's funny is a buddy of mine texted me yesterday, and he just said something endless prosperity is what he said, and I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? He goes, endless prosperity. I go, what are you talking about? He goes, I'm listening to a podcast you did, and you said, you and some other guy said endless prosperity like 40 times. I thought you must have had it was like a slogan or a bumper sticker. I said, was this like a road to serfdom thing? And he's like, yeah, I think so. Yeah, you're talking about that. I'm like, I don't remember that, but that doesn't sound like something we would like organically say. And anyway, but like I appreciate
that came from chapter 4, the inevitability of planning, because I do remember that was a theme of that. Everyone's like, well, if we plan it, there will be endless prosperity.
Right.
But I'm
he was listening to it off of Spotify, so I'm like, that's gotta be like a year old, man. Anyway, but I appreciate everyone, you know, watching and listening, and I hope that, you know, that they were able to, I don't know, enjoy this journey with us of going back and looking at what this guy had to say. And again, ripple effect, you know, we don't know. But thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Kevin, for doing this. This is a lot of time and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can say there is no book that I know more intimately than this one. We've read it through, you know, 100 times, and
oh my God,
probably
right?
You know, at least 50 hours of recording and prepped for it. So, but yeah, it was a fun experience, man. It's always great to really know the material of something kind of inside and out, because you know, one of the takeaways that I don't want taken from this is to use Hayek as so many people use, even, you know, Thomas Sowell or Ben Shapiro or Michael Knowles, all these books that are made for you to remember bumper sticker slogans that you can use in a fight online to easily win. That's not what this book is for. This book is to actually learn something from and take to apply to your life and apply to your worldview, and hopefully change the world around you for the better without forcing everyone else to do the same thing. So I think, you know, if you listen to this, I hope that's the message we put across. And yeah, like you said, thank you very much for consuming this content. It took a lot of work to do, but hopefully we can do it again with another fun book.
Yeah. So, Kevin, I almost forgot that we're content creators because it's been so long.
Yeah. Are we recording this?
Yeah. So people can find Kevin. Kevin does his own stuff occasionally. I feel like both him and I had a baby and he's been working a lot lately, but
working on a baby.
Kevin's got a huge you got a baby coming. When's your daughter due? Can I say daughter?
This year. No, June. Yeah. This is the script. I'm gonna Eric Swanson this, or right? No.
You mean Ron Swanson?
Ron Swanson, not Eric Swanson. I don't know. It's his brother, but yeah, Ron Swanson.
Okay. Anyway, June. Okay, cool. That's when I think my sister-in-law's having a baby in June too. Anyway, but that's cool. So it's been a while, but people, you can find Kevin at engineeringpolitics.locals.com, ENG_politics on Twitter, and YouTube Engineering Politics. Are you trying to remember if I'm giving you like the right links? I am, aren't I?
I think so. I'm pretty sure. I think you got it. You find ENG _politics.
Oh, and ThinkSpot as well. Nice. And I think, have you done stuff on Medium or Substack yet?
Medium, I have. Substack, what I'm actually going to do is all my old writing, which like I said, I've changed my ideology so much in the last year that I actually want to re-edit all my old content and even point out where I'm naive. I want to do the same thing we're doing to Hayek here, and like, this idiot who wrote this 4 years ago had completely out of whack. So that's something that I actually want to do. with
I'm
my
really
old
proud
stuff.
of you coming around on that bestiality thing, man. You had some weird opinions before.
Well, come on. You got to find love in weird places, I guess. Which reminds
You
me,
are in Wisconsin.
_politics /OnlyFans. You can find me in contact. Okay. But yeah, make sure to check out Truman at Return to Reason. It's returntoreason.locals.com. Great place to find them. At My Mundane Mind on Twitter. And Return to Reason, ThinkSpot, YouTube's, which you're watching right now. And really anywhere else. Just search Return to Reason. You'll find something somewhere.
You will. And I'm not that other guy on YouTube either. But,
yeah, if you search it on eBay, then you're gonna find some different stuff. But
they have great bracelets. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching. Kevin, it's a lot of fun, and yeah, look forward to the next